morning, everyone. Welcome. You made it to Lansing in July for a workshop. So kudos to you for committing some of your summer and your time and energy in the month of July to come learn about something that can hopefully be implemented in your schools to grow and improve what you have in place to really serve your district and your students the way you want it to. So again, welcome this morning. My name is Joe Priest. With me is Brian Lloyd. We are both consultants at the Michigan Department of Education. My focus area is really around educator evaluations. Brian works a little bit more closely with the student growth and research aspect. So those are sort of our specialty areas, and so we come together to present this workshop. Really the big idea with this workshop is to bring all different types of stakeholders together from within your district to try to have some conversations and some good collaboration and some decision making around educator evaluation, and especially the measurement of student growth for educator evaluation. So we hope that this opportunity can encourage some of those conversations and help you all move forward with what you're hoping to do with educator evaluation. We could not pull this off without our great partners at MASA. So Mitch is here in the back of the room. You probably noticed a few video cameras. I was thinking last night as I was thinking about the workshop, that's probably something we should have gave the participants a heads up about. So I apologize in advance for not letting you know that we'll be recording this session. So if anyone didn't make themselves up all the way they want to today, tomorrow's another chance. But Mitch is going to keep the cameras pointed up here on us. A lot of our workshop is we alternate between presenting and then turning it back over to you for some team work time. Mitch is not going to record the team work sessions. That's your private time to have the conversations that need to be had. So know that those conversations and that time of the workshop will not be recorded. It was just recording the presentation part so that hopefully we can turn this workshop into some online modules that maybe districts and teachers and leaders and all people around the state can access a little bit on more of an on-demand basis instead of always having to come to us or come to a meeting spot to get the content. So that's kind of our big idea with the recording. Brian's background, he was actually an employee here at Ingham ISD for a while. His background is as a school psychologist and also as a consultant here at the ISD as an MTSS implementer and coach. I might have put an extra syllable in that word. My background comes K-12. I was an elementary teacher in Arizona. I was also a principal there. Assistant principal at the junior high and a principal at the elementary level. I was also a principal here in Michigan for 1 year. That's the state I'm in. And then I came over to the department just about a year ago. So Brian and I both have that kind of school-based and ISD-based experience. So we know a lot of the experiences that you have. And we also know some of the challenges that are embedded within educator evaluation. And we also think in our experience working with districts and teams, as well as our own experience, we have some good solutions that can help work around some of those challenges. So we hope to help pull some of those out as we go through the workshop the next few days. But first and foremost, we really just want to thank you for being here. It is very much our honor and privilege to present to you and share some information with you and lead your teams through some work to hopefully help you make some collaborative decisions. Again, all around this idea of improving our educator evaluation systems. Brian, is there anything you want to add just as a little introduction?
Yeah, throughout this content, we've done this content already during the school year. We did regional workshops. We did a full day session, 6 different regions across the state of Michigan. In the fall, another day in the winter, another day in the spring, right? So the good news here is that this content has been vetted for 750 registrants, and I don't know how many different districts already. And we've made some good adjustments based on feedback. But one thing that we found is that some of the hopefully we're going to provide you with content that is going to be critically useful. But maybe just as useful is hearing the practices that other districts across the state are engaged in, because there is probably more expertise on this side of the podium than there is on this side of the podium in that you are all engaged in the practice. So I really want this to be interactive. We've structured these workshops to be about half tell, half plan. And it's really, this was structured so that all 3 days are centered around district teams developing action plans that they bring back to their districts, right? And so active participation and active engagement are going to yield better results. And so that is true both in the small group setting as you're talking with your teams and in the large group settings because your perspectives have utility both to your team and to the broader teams across the room. So, so I really want to encourage you. And I would also say that we've also, you're going to probably hear information or news that's going to cause some disequilibrium, right? That's going to, here is your mind frame, or here is your perspective of what the law says or what MDE demands or what we have to do. And you might find some news that challenges that, right? So in those times, you can, if you hear something that either surprises you, feel free to interact and speak because we want to know when that, at that point of instruction, when there is a disconnect between prior knowledge and the knowledge that we're currently presenting. So because that really helps us make sure that we identify misperceptions out there. So, and thank you so much for being here, and I hope this day is going to be a productive one for you.
And Brian, when we switch speakers, we have to pass this mic back and forth. So that's our test to see if we can remember that. Luckily, Brian has this big booming voice that doesn't need a microphone, but for the recording, it helps a little bit to have the mic pinned to us. So in case you didn't already see, restrooms are out to the right. We do have some water in the back of the room here, and I believe there's also a cooler there that might have some soda in there as well, if you're interested in that as the day goes along. We'll pop our agenda up here in the middle in a minute, but we do take a break in the morning and the afternoon as well as a lunch about in the middle of the day. And of course, we're all adults here, so you can take care of your needs as you have them. If it's a phone call or whatever you need to take, feel free to do that. And we'll just keep on rolling. We do have a lot of content to share and a lot of work time to do, so we should try to keep things pretty tight and keep them on schedule. And I hope that you'll help us with that today. Let's see, let's get started here. Oh, first, again, as I mentioned, the whole point of this workshop is to bring different stakeholder groups together from your district. So let's see how we're doing with that so far. So just a quick raise of hand. So do we have some central office people here? Look around a little bit, see who. So these are our curriculum directors, assistant superintendents, okay? And building level leaders, principals, good, assistant principals, good. And then a lot of hands up going for teachers now. Yay, okay, awesome, great. All those groups are really important. Their opinions are important, what's valuable to each. We know there's different perspectives in this educator evaluation game depending on where you're sitting, but we think that the conversation around this table can really help improve the system as a whole. So here's our agenda for today. So we're going to do a little overview this morning. We're going to have a break. We're going to really a big part of our workshop is really focused on student learning objectives, which is a method that can be used and a process that can be used to come up with student growth ratings using local assessment data sources. We're going to do a lunch in the middle of the day around noon, and then in the afternoon we're going to talk about how to integrate some of the key steps that are involved in the educator evaluation timeline with some other district processes. We're also really going to dig into this really important idea of the balance that every district has to play within their system between having really good comparable results across all their teachers and the idea of allowing some decision making and autonomy within the process. So there's a real balancing act that has to occur between those. We're going to give you some time and information to talk through that because that's a really important kind of cluster of decisions that can be made there. We do a break, and then in the afternoon we're going to really dig into your assessments, specifically the assessments that are currently in place in your system to see where they might already match up and be able to be used for educator evaluation purposes. Okay? as I'm looking around the room, I forgot some important group that we have in here. So we talked about the teachers and the building leaders and the district leaders, but we also have some MDE consultants here in the room, right, from our partnership districts. At least a few of you. I see Lisa back here. I know we had a couple registered. So, oh yeah, I thought I saw you back there. You're Gloria, right? Yeah, okay. So we have a few of our MDE consultants here in the room together today. They're here to learn and to support their teams. So just know that they're in the room too as added resources. Okay, important thing. I try to get everyone an email out in advance. Some of the emails got bounced back to me, so I apologize if they didn't all reach you. But this is a website that you're going to want to open up right now because this has all of our documents in it. So we provide all the documents in paper copy in the folders. We also provide them in this electronic Google Drive, so they can be downloaded or edited or worked on collaboratively and shared amongst your group. So we really think there's a lot of power and utility in this. It's the tinyurl.com/student growth workshop. Another thing that's in there, in that folder, is today's PowerPoint. That would be another thing that I recommend you to open up because there's a lot of live links that we put in the PowerPoint, including the links to all of the protocols that we're going to use today. So if you follow along with that PowerPoint, sometimes clicking there can get your group work started a little bit quicker. And if you're familiar with Google Drive, or if you're not familiar with Google Drive, it's a place that holds documents. You can't get in there and change them, or else they'd change them for everybody. So first you have to do the make a copy for yourself, or download it so you have your own version, and then you can work on it and change it and share it any way that you want. But you can't tweak the one that's in the drive because that one stays the same for everybody. So you got to make your own copy first. tinyurl.com/student growth workshop. There should be a folder in there for each day. We're going to be on the day one stuff today, of course, as well as the PowerPoint that's in there in the opening section. As you know, we have a top 10 in 10 strategic goal from the Michigan Department of Education to try to align all of our efforts across the state to raise all of our students up to really have a high-performing education state within this 10-year strategic plan. The work we're doing today really focuses on goal number 3, which is really about preparing our educator workforce to making sure we have high-quality prepared individuals in front of every student, leading every school every day. So our work today supports that growth and development through this workshop series, but also because of educator evaluation's role with and connection to professional development, we feel like it also drives the professional development, can really help support this strategic goal overall. So we really think educator evaluation is a really key catalyst and leverage point that can be used to improve schools and systems and grow our teacher practice and ultimately improve student learning and get us to some of our goals that we have in the long term. So here's our mission statement from our office. We are from the Office of Educator Excellence. We have been rebranded in the last year, but that's our new name. We were combined with the Office of Professional Preparation Services that does all the certification and so now we're part of this big Office of Educator Excellence, which looks at educators from preparation at our preparation institutes, all the way through placement, mentoring and induction, recruitment, retention, growing our professionals, all the way through retirement. So we're kind of in this cool space now where we get to see, responsible for supporting educators from preparation all the way through their whole career. So we're really in a good space here, and we think educator evaluation, again, can be a catalyst for professional learning and professional development to support those educators. Here's some of the work we do. We do work around educator evaluations, like the work we're doing today. We do student growth work and develop tools and resources to help with those efforts. We lead the Michigan Teacher of the Year campaign, which we just named a new Teacher of the Year in the last 30 days or so. Mrs. Laura Chang from, it's not Waterville, no, where is she from? It begins with a V, Vicksburg. Vicksburg, down in the southwest corner of the state, really fantastic teacher. I got to know her because I got to work with her last year on the Michigan Teacher Leadership Advisory Council, which is a group of teacher leaders from around the state that are now sort of our regional Teacher of the Year. And they come together to do some important work at the state level. So our office coordinates all of that work. We also do this Proud Michigan Educator campaign to, again, continue to try to lift up and highlight the important and excellent work that our educators are doing, because I don't know if anyone has felt this, but sometimes we are a little bit under attack here in the education world, aren't we? And we're a little bit beat down. So we try to do in our office, do a little bit of this positive promotion of educators, because we feel like there's a lot, and you know it because you're in schools every day, there's a lot of excellent, really committed, and fantastic things that happen on a day-to-day basis that don't see the light of day. So we try to highlight some of those things to, again, just highlight the excellent work done by educators in our state. We have a Michigan Excellence and Talent Pool, again, which is a group of teachers that might be the under-the-radar teachers. They don't always step forward to take on all the leadership roles, but they're really fantastic. So it's kind of a behind-the-scenes way that we collect feedback from really excellent teachers around the state. And then we also do this really cool educator workforce research that Brian is really part of with another colleague in our office, where we look at trends as far as shortages and how teachers are moving around, and differences between teachers based on background or their assignment, or how people are moving or staying. So it's really great research to help us see where the trends are in our state and how we can better support to have a great teacher in front of every student. Okay, here's some of our beliefs about educator evaluation. We think that there's space in educator evaluation to allow teacher decision-making and autonomy. And we also think that that can be done while still producing results that are comparable as far as making some of those decisions, and when we need educator evaluations to provide comparable results. We think there's a way to achieve both those things. We think that when we're talking about student growth data and for educator evaluations, it should measure the things that are most important to the educators that are involved. So we believe that we should be picking assessment sources and data sources and processes that are valuable to the educators. Not an extra thing, not a hoop, not a thing just for evaluation, but a thing that's embedded in their practice and valuable, and something that they are doing and is important to their day-to-day work. Same idea here, using data sources that actually informs what's happening in the classroom, right? So that helps the teacher to know more about their students and actually make a difference for them in an instructional way. So we've developed a whole slew of resources. If you haven't visited our EdEval website, this is another good one to go to right now, michigan.gov/MDE edevals, EDEVALS. Lots of information there. That first column, really good, just general guidance, talks about the legislative requirements, what's the difference between an observation and an evaluation, how many observations are required each year, all those different kinds of things. Some really good frequently asked questions, as well as an at-a-glance document that really dives into legislation. Good resources there, especially for maybe new teachers as a part of a mentoring induction program, new people to your system, new administrators. Some really good overviews there, as well as the requirements for districts to post the evaluation tools that they're using. There's some information about those. The middle part is, these two columns are really about the student growth aspect. So we have a bunch of resources around student learning objectives, which again is the process that really the focus of this workshop is. But all of our documents are held there, so we have some frequently asked questions. We have a template that can be used by teachers and districts to actually write SLOs, so a checklist to help make sure all the components are there. We have this really cool tool that Brian's going to show you after lunch today that can help you organize the data, as well as a really, really strong way and helpful tool to help you set goals for students within the year. And it allows you to set differentiated goals based on the student performance. Okay? So not every student has the same goal. This tool actually helps you to set differentiated goals for students, and then use that as a way to measure the teacher's success of helping students reach those goals. And we also have some instructions and videos to help you pull those things off. We also have a bunch, these things are really good for the local assessment, the assessments that we're going to choose locally to use within our evaluation. And then these tools over here are really good for the state data that's required to be used in evaluations, and we're going to get into that, and I think on the next slide or two about those particulars. But as far as M-STEP data, The reports that come from the state are going to be in the SGP format. That's what gives you the student's growth on an individual student basis. So this gives a lot of information about what is a student growth percentile, as well as some calculators and some other guidance tools. We're going to spend a good chunk of the, is it the afternoon tomorrow, Brian, going over SGP?
Yeah. Late morning, early.
Okay. So we hit SGP real hard tomorrow. So if you came to this workshop really with some of those questions about what we're going to do with state data, no, we're going to hit that really hard tomorrow. Okay, so again, our resources are all located inside the MDE page in the EdEval section. You can find it the long way by going to Educator Services and Educator Evaluations, or again, here's the shortcut.
This is a practice I like to do. Joe and I have done a lot of presentations at professional organizations and ISDs around the state and what have you. And I like doing this when we get to this. Here's our website, and here's other great resources we've developed. So raise your hand if you are interested in either student growth measurement or educator evaluations in general, education evaluation. Raise your hand if you're interested.
Yep, that's everyone.
So, and for those who haven't raised your hand, just to let you know, this is a workshop about measurement of student growth for educator evaluations. So if you didn't raise your hand, you may want to reconsider, the beach or whatever. So now, raise your hand if you've been to the Department of Education's Educator Evaluations website and have seen the resources on there.
Before just now.
Before this morning. Okay, see, this is pretty common. Yeah. It's really, it speaks to the lack of messaging, or the lack of reception, or the lack of effective messaging on MDE's part about getting this message out, because that was about the a portion of hands that's raised every time, and it both surprises and frustrates me every single time. But it's been very consistent.
Yes, but we've seen a little progress.
We have seen.
So when we ask you again tomorrow, think how many hands are going to go up, and we'll be able to just measure our growth right there.
That's right.
A theme that we try to put out, and then we'll try to keep revisiting, is that idea of continuous improvement. So just like Brian and I are talking about, we're trying to make this workshop better all the time. We're trying to have that number of people who know about this information go up all the time. That's the theme that we try to work through this workshop. For your work, too, is how to continually make this process better all the time, as well as how to create a process that helps make your educators better a little bit every year. Because really, that's the name of the game that we're in anymore in education. Okay, so how do we organize these 3 days? Again, remember, like Brian said, this was done with a few months in between each stop when we did this during the school year. So it'll be a little bit different for us doing it back to back. So we're going to work really hard to keep you all with us, okay? But some of this content gets a little heavy, so just stay with us. Know that there's a collaboration time coming soon, okay? Or stand up and stretch if you start feeling the burn a little bit. But today we're going to start talking about developing your student growth framework. We're going to talk about building a team. We're going to look at, again, at your assessments that you're using within your system and see which one of those might provide value for educator evaluation. And we're really going to start looking at this idea of how we can start setting goals for students and how that can become the success criteria, or how teachers measure their success for evaluation purposes. Tomorrow, we're going to look at this idea of a balanced assessment system, and really the idea of how to measure the progress of student growth and how to start to think about measuring that and turning it into a rating, and also the importance of bringing student growth and assessment into feedback cycles as a conversation point, as something that we're using to provide feedback for teachers during the evaluation cycles. On day 3, it's about bringing those student growth scores together, calculating them, and combining them with your teacher evaluation rubric to come up with an overall summative rating. Okay? So we're going to start with day 1, just talking about building a team and a process, all the way to day 3 when we have a process to where it spits out a summative rating at the end. Okay? We think that while this gets a lot of fanfare and attention, that summative rating, we understand why it's so important, right? And a lot of times, that's what gets our attention first. We think, of course, that there's a lot more important things than the summative rating. We think all the feedback that's involved is, of course, the number one thing. but we didn't feel like we'd be doing a good job at a workshop if we didn't bring you all the way through the whole process to how to form a summative rating at the end of this thing. Okay? But we don't want to get hung up there, but we know that is an important outcome of this educator evaluation. Okay, so you're going to be working in teams today. You're either at a table with your team from your district, or maybe you're at a table that has some smaller teams combined together. Okay? Either way, you're going to be talking with the people that are around you. That's a big part of this workshop. So we do want to just pause for a moment here to just think about some norms of collaboration, things that we can do, adult behaviors and collaborative skills that we can use to help make our work go better. So these come from the Center of Adaptive Schools. We've seen these before, right? These are pretty common across Michigan. I've seen them on posters hanging in front offices and conference rooms all over the place. So just some norms: pausing, paraphrasing, posing questions, putting ideas on the table, providing data, paying attention to self and others, and presuming positive intentions. I love that last one. So we're just going to do our first quick breakout team discussion here, just about 7 minutes or so, thinking about these norms and thinking about what Brian said, some disequilibrium interjected into these conversations, right, and different perspectives. Okay? What things do we need to think in mind, either for yourself or for your table, that you can do that really will help make your group work together? Okay? So just a conversation around norms. What commitments can we make as a team to help make our collaborative work really well together? We'll put 7 minutes on the clock and get back together with you at that time. Okay? Just a quick check-in about norms and how you work together over the next 3 days. Okay, let's come back together. We like to start the workshop by giving out first some thank yous for coming, but also then some apologies, because we will be interrupting you for the next 3 days. We will get you started on these great conversations. We will give you 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes to talk about them. And inevitably, no matter how much time we give you, we will be interrupting you before you're ready for it to be over. So apologies in advance. I hope you got to the idea of norms. I know as an administrator, I found a lot of bang for my buck in those first two right there. Just keeping your mouth closed for a little while, and then restating what that other person was thinking to make sure you understand before you move forward. Okay? So I think if we spend some time there, especially as we're trying to understand where other people are coming from, because remember, people at the table are coming with a little bit different perspective than you. You'll get a lot of benefit from that. And then also, we just always have to stay here, everybody. When we're working with our colleagues, when we're working with parents and students, we have to stay here. Because if we start assuming negative intentions, we're not going to get anywhere. So let's stay there, treat each other well, and we'll get a lot of good work done. Okay. So what are some of our requirements? Okay, so when we're talking educator evaluation, we've got multiple layers of things to consider, right? We've got these legislative requirements. We've got some requirements that are added on probably by our framework or rubric that we adopted. We've got our local adopted any kind of rules or guidelines in our administrative handbook and any district policy. So there's lots of overlapping layers here when it comes to requirements. So let's make sure we're on the same page, because what we find is that as we go out, sometimes we find that people think that the requirements are more restrictive than what they are. So we hope to point out over the next few days, oh, the air conditioning feels really good. I just felt that kick on. Over the next 3 days, point out the opportunities for local decision making where you can have control and autonomy, because I think there's a lot of those in there that aren't generally known as far as those key decision making points. So we'll try to point some of those out for you too, so you can continue to make this educator evaluation thing as specific and customized to your system and your goals as possible.
And another really important point to make sure that we clarify too. There is the legislators who make the law, including the educator evaluation law. And here is us.
I'm over here with Brian.
Legislators, us, right? a support unit. We're here to help you develop the best system that you possibly can while meeting the legislative requirements, right? But I also wanted to make sure that we did point out that difference as well, and also make sure that hey, we're here to help you.
Mm-hmm. So we know the legislation was written by our elected officials, right? And MDE's job is to help support that. We can't make these changes to any of this stuff, but we can provide the support, and sometimes we get to provide some insight to the legislators. And I can already predict what your question is, but ask it anyways.
Actually, I didn't want to throw you off kilter because I couldn't remember if you said the whole questions or not. So that was
No, go for it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Okay, now you've used your question. Anyone else? No, go ahead.
My students, can I ask you a question? Yes, you just did. No, I said no. I know the whole bifurcated nature of you versus legislature. I know, and this might be, is the bill stalled in education to return it 25% still?
Great. Okay, I'm going to hit that. Okay, so there is a bill in legislation. Let's talk about that in context with this slide. So notice the years on this. The legislation was written where it sort of tiered or changed over time. So for the 15, 16, and 17, 18 school years, the one we just finished, this was the breakdown, right? 75% on the teacher evaluation model or rubric, 25% based on student growth scores, okay? That was the year we just finished. Legislation wrote that in 2018-19, which is coming up here very, very quickly, that changed, right? The weighting went from 75% for the evaluation tool to 60%, and from 25% of student growth to being 40% of the overall evaluation being student growth. Now, there is a bill, is it 5707?
Yeah.
5707 that we haven't seen a lot of action on lately, but there is a bill that would maintain these levels on a permanent basis. Okay? And that bill has some support. I know it has some support from educator organizations in our state. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more movement on that bill during the 18-19 school year. But as far as what's in legislation right now, this is what it says. So this is what we still provide guidance on. This is what we're helping everyone to be prepared for. But it's really, really important to know that there could be a change within the school year that could possibly retroactively put us back to here on a permanent basis where we stay at 25% overall for student growth.
And another quick one, I'm sorry, and if you're going to cover it later, just tell me to shut up and listen. The 20%, the new grade slice.
Yes.
That makes sense for a lot of people who have an obvious state test.
True.
For like secondary non-math or English teachers or special teachers or like a whole slew of teachers,
Mm-hmm.
majority of teachers who don't have a state test or haven't been prescribed a state test. A lot of us look at that and say, okay, cool, well, if I don't fall into there, how does my I look?
Mm-hmm.
What else can I put into that? So I'm hoping, are we going to cover?
You just made the best case for our workshop. That's the whole reason we're here.
And I'm not a plant, I promise.
Well, maybe tomorrow. We'll work on that. Okay, so yes, two pies here, 40% broken up into two pies, right? The top part, local, this state. State data, local data, okay? Now, this says tested grades and subject. So who are the tested grades and subjects? So if there's state growth data available, the legislation said it has to be included in that teacher's evaluation. So who will it be available and provided for? Okay, our only state test is the MSTEP. Okay, there's other assessments that students take in our state, but as far as state test data, MDE interprets that as MSTEP. Okay, so we already know that MSTEP is not taken across all grades, right? And so for the teachers that will have state growth data provided for them will be grades 4 through 8, ELA, and math. Okay? 1 second, okay? Not third grade, right? Because we could certainly measure proficiency in third grade, but we don't have what? We don't have growth because we don't have a starting point for those third graders, right? First year of the assessment, no growth information yet. Fourth grade, we can look at the change from third to fourth grade, and there's our growth. Fourth grade is the first grade that could have state test data. Okay? 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade in the subject areas that have consecutive tested every year. Okay? Notice I said ELA and math. I did not say what? Because there's a gap, right? We skip a year, right? So it's not fair. It's really not possible to attribute 2 years of growth scores to 2 different teachers and have that be appropriate or an accurate representation of just the work that one teacher did, right? Those 2 teachers together, yeah, we created this, but separating it out for one or the other would be too hard, right? So for state test data only available for grades 4th through 8th, ELA and math, which ends up being the minority of our teachers, okay? So for everybody else, K through 3, 9 through 12, science and social studies, non-core areas, right? Still 60-40, but the whole 40 becomes the local assessment, okay? So that feeling that,
So that was disequilibrium. I just heard some disequilibrium in the room.
that is what has caught the attention of a lot of educator organizations around the state and has probably prompted some of this action and really that bill to try to keep us at 25 because, we, like you said, we don't have a state assessment for every grade, not to mention every subject, right? So that provided some of that motivation for that bill to be written, okay? So looking at, okay, we'll go here. And then you, right, because you had one too?
So I know you said 4th through 8th grade, ELA and math,
Yes.
MSTEP. Knowing that 8th grade does not take the MSTEP for ELA and math this year, they're taking the PSAT. My assumption is that 8th grade is voided this first year.
Okay, so this is, I try to hold off on this point as long as I possibly can because there's 2, every time we present again, there's 2 like equilibrium points. And so and so we hit the first one. There's probably more than 2, but these are the 2 biggest ones. So when are ratings, educator evaluations due into rep? June 30, right? When do you get MSTEP results back? Right. August, hopefully, right? And then student growth data and the student growth percentiles really get then they get calculated, and so that is until like end of September, early October, if we're lucky, right? So, but regardless, it's after June 30. That is the reality of our situation. Don't shoot the messenger. That's what our current world is, right? So. If the law were for 17, 18 and the requirement of student growth, you would be using for 2018 educator evaluations the MSTEPs, the MSTEP data from 2017. Now, to get into the law also states, and we're going to get into this in a lot more specificity later, right? But the law also does state that 3 years of student growth data should be used when 3 years of student growth data is available, right? So no matter what, if you're following the legislation, if you have that data, previous year test scores would be included within educator evaluations, regardless, right? So, and we have a tool to help automate this, and we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, especially on day 2. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail and efficient ways to be able to do this. But we preach from a pulpit, and we've had a slide, and we're going to have plenty of slides on this, that at the forefront of educator evaluations and the use of student growth within educator evaluation should be facilitating continuous improvement. That is what educator evaluation should be about, right? Now, but there is going to be a natural, it's a lot harder to facilitate continuous improvement when you are using data from the previous school year, right? And I wish I could wave a magic wand and fix those timelines, but it's the reality of our situation. It's up to us, our unit, it's up to educators, it's up to everybody across the state to facilitate continuous improvement given the reality of our situations, the best continuous improvement we can, given the realities of our situation. So, so I say all this is required background in an attempt to answer your question, right, is for educator evaluations for 2018-19, the first year of this change of portions, that we would be using MSTEP 2018. So 4 through 8 will be the tested grades and subjects, the recommended tested grades and subjects for MSTEP, right? And then 2019-20 evaluations would be using the state assessment, which would be the PSAT in 8-9. So what student growth data is going to be available for 19-20 evaluations are going, we're still having internal conversations with assessment accountability and ourselves about what that data is going to be. But we're just, I'm just happy we have a good enough plan for 18-19 evaluations, and we'll determine the student growth data available for 19-20 within the 18-19 school year.
Yeah, that whole 8th grade thing threw an interesting added loop into this, because that really just came out this school year, right? That 8th grade became the option of the PSAT or the MSTEP, right? That was new, right? So that was interesting added wrinkle. Okay, this slide always generates a lot of questions.
Yeah,
Yep.
my question just was, our students take the My Access to teach in a self-contained school. So is that part of it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So student growth percentiles is state-provided student growth data, right? Student growth, so that could be data that could be used for educator evaluation, and we provide you resources and tools to be able to do that. Student growth percentiles are calculated for MSTEP and My Access Functional Independence. Okay, so you do have state student growth data available for My Access Functional Independence. You don't for participation in the other one. Support. You know I should know these, right? They are. So those would not students who take those My Access would not be considered tested grades and subjects. And those would be your center-based programs, right? For the most part. Students who took those assessments would be considered students who are non-tested grades and subjects. Yeah, because any metric that you would come up with to measure student growth for those two assessments just don't provide you with any good growth metric.
All right, heavy slide, huh? Okay, so regardless of whether this bill goes through or not,
we have to plan for the
yeah, we have to plan for this, but whether it's 25% or 40%, we know there's a large group of teachers in the state that are going to need student growth into their evaluation that aren't going to come from a state test. So that really sets the stage for this workshop, which is really about selecting those local assessments and processes to pull that off. Now, you can do it in a way that not only accomplishes this, but also empowers your teachers and makes it a process that can really improve learning and really be your PLC structure and everything, okay? So that's what this workshop is about, is leveraging what we have to do here for educator evaluation purposes to lift up what we're going to do in our other practices, okay? So local assessment, super, super important. No? Okay. All right. So Brian mentioned one of the elements of the law is that we have to use multiple years of data. We do think that there are some flexibility for how that can be interpreted as far as using multiple measures, and our SLO calculator tool really has a way to use 2 years of previous data to help you set goals for this current school year And we would consider that using 3 years of assessment data. Little different interpretation than maybe you would have just thought of it straightforward. You have to use multiple years of data. One way is to use 2 years of previous data to set goals for the upcoming year, and that would still be considered using multiple years of data within evaluation. Okay? That's a little different than just using all 3 years of scores, right? We're going to show you a tool that can help you to do that. So that's just one of the kind of interpretation that's a little bit more flexible and open than maybe what, if we just read the legislation word for word, what we might pull out from it on our own. We do recommend making district policies for these decisions. You'll get a lot more comparability, a lot more buy-in, a lot more consistency if you have some district policies that guide this process, and we're going to help you with that over the next few days. And again, continuous improvement needs to be the name of the game, and we're going to really dig into how to pull more than one data source together to turn that into your student growth rating that you combine with your framework rating to come up with a summative rating. Okay? So we're going to talk about how to pull those multiple data sources together. Lisa.
Joe, if I can paraphrase what you were just saying about setting goals. So
Yes.
if we were able to turn the clock back a little bit, the suggestion would be to use 15, 16, and 16, 17 M-STEP data to set goals for the 17, 18 school year, thus impacting that data point, which would then impact. So that comes to my mind there is, in order to have those data points in with districts that have a date requirement in their contracts for when goals have to be established, in knowing that you don't often get that growth data until September, October. Am I understanding what you said?
So there's going to be a year lag on state assessment data.
Right, I get that. But I still need, if I'm trying to make a goal, or help a teacher make a goal, I still need that for that year to impact, with the hope that it'll impact them a year later on their eval.
Well, here's the great balance that this legislation helps us to strike. If it stays this way, your state growth, like Brian said, is always going to be a year back because we're waiting for the results, right? And you're probably going to be an average of the 3 prior years, right? That's what works really well here. But here is where you can do your within-year growth, okay? So if this might be 1 year back, this can be your within year, right? So how your students this year do on your goals. So it strikes a nice balance there.
And for the majority of teachers across the state, this pie piece is all orange, right? So this would all be within year data. Now, the legislation says use 3 years of data when available. So this would be for 18-19 school year, this would be 18-19 data for the majority of teachers across the state, the entirety. Now, for tested grades and set for 4 through 8 ELA math, still within year data is going to be used for every single teacher across the state. It's just going to be split for 4 through 8 ELA math, right? But for the vast majority of teachers, the entirety is all going to be within your data. Now, the legislation says that you use 3 years of data when available. So districts have a choice of, well, we'll use 2 years of historical scores to set targets for the current year, right? We'll use 16, 17, 17, 18 to set targets for 18, 19, and that's one interpretation. Or we're going to use 3 years worth of data to determine what our ratings are, and there's a lot of different ways to do that as well. So real-time data or data within year, data that describes the growth within the current school year is going to be part of every teacher's evaluation and the entirety of most of the teachers across the state.
So how would that apply if there's a new teacher in that grade? So for instance, for 4th grade, if we receive a new teacher, how would that apply for that new teacher?
Great questions already this morning. So if you're a first-year teacher and you're a teacher of ELA or math in grades 4 through 8, you have no student growth data available to you, right?
From the state.
You would be considered a non-test grade and subject teacher for that first year, right? and this would all be orange. So that you would use the student growth data that you have available to you, which would be data that would be local to your LEA. And this is what this workshop is all about. Well, not all about, but mostly about. Now, once that teacher goes into their second year of teaching, now they're going to have a year of student growth data available to them, which would be what they would use for that portion.
If it's available, it's required to be used. If it's not available, it can't be used.
But if that teacher, hypothetically, that first year teacher, now for second year, your next slide says it has to be 3 years of data. She still doesn't.
When 3 years of data,
When available. Yeah.
When available. So, and this is hopefully we hopefully have got a rule of thumb at MDE, and this unfortunately this surprises some people maybe, but when determining your local district practices, and you're trying to determine whether or not it makes sense with our office's guidance around educator evaluation in general, or use of student growth in particular, ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, will it facilitate continuous improvement? Will it make our teachers better? If yes, probably in alignment. Number 2, does this make sense? Does it make common sense given the restrictions that we have? Right? Use common sense. If there isn't any data available, don't use that unavailable data. If that data is available, then use that available data. But in general, we try to center our guidance around common sense when that common sense is possible to be used.
In a world that not everything always makes sense. So that's the challenge.
Right.
I thought I saw a hand creeping up there. Yes.
Yeah, not to throw a monkey wrench in, but now with the requirement for third grade reading level and all that, is that gonna get tied into this thing at all, or no?
No, I don't see any connection there because that's really about proficiency, that 3rd grade proficiency, hitting a certain target, where this is really about measuring the student's growth from one point to the next. So it's really a different measure and a whole different set of legislation.
Yeah.
So they don't intermingle too much.
They're certainly not going to intermingle to the point of mandate, right? There's recommendation and there's mandate. We do recommend that you use data, assessments, that are meaningful to the teacher, right, and are aligned to the as best you can to stakes, right, that are aligned to whether they be standards or whether they be, and hopefully they're one and the same, to assessments that have consequence for the teachers and the students that the teachers teach, right? So the assessments that you're using to determine growth for meeting whatever requirement, right, does it make sense to have alignment, if nothing else, with those assessments and the data that you're using to determine student growth? I mean, it sure makes sense to me, right? Again, common sense. So, but we're going to walk through an assessment inventory, right? That looks at what assessments, because this is probably the most difficult thing about measurement of student growth in general and student learning objectives in particular, is determining what assessments are going to be used to determine your growth, right? So you have to put this is the most difficult thing, so you should put the most amount of thought that you possibly can into these decisions as a district, right? So what assessments are we going to choose to determine our success criteria? And we're going to talk about this ad nauseum probably for 3 days, so I don't want to hammer this too hard right now. But just know that that's going to be a focus moving forward for the next 3 days.
This slide always generates a lot of buzz, so it's okay that we're spending some time here.
With kindergarten, and so like we test the MDE, and we test kindergarten 3 times a year with MDE. I would consider putting kindergarten in the same spot as you would 3rd grade as far as instep, because there's no prior data. So how effective of evaluation do you think is for kindergarten teachers?
Well, since you're measuring multiple times throughout the year, that gives you your different data points to measure growth. And and we have some slides in here about what assessments are being used in the field across the state, and NWA is one of the most popular ones because it provides those growth percentiles for students, and it's very standardized and has a lot of data in it. So that's a very common one that's used across lots of grade levels. Okay.
Yeah, and when we say 3 years of data to be used, right, if you're a fourth grade teacher, that means 3 years of fourth grade data, right? It would be 3 years of the results of my instruction, and not 3 years being within the 17-18 school year, fourth grade, third grade, and second grade, because that's other teachers' instruction, right? It would be 3 years of the results of your instruction. Would be the 3 years.
This is from a legislative point of view, and every time as a curriculum coach or a curriculum specialist in here, and we log the teacher in under fourth grade, whether you go to another school or not, when you teach fourth grade at another school, will you still have fourth grade data if you test another group of fourth grade graders because your name is linked to that group of kids, or no?
Yes. Yes.
But you're going to have to use the data that you have access to, and if you're not able to get access to that data from where the teacher was before, you're probably not going to be able to use it. You're going to have to stick with what's available to you.
You would use whatever data is representative of the instruction that you did within that current school year. Right? Now, we're going to get into this in a lot more detail, really on day 2. So I don't want to bird walk too far because we're going to start losing the room. But because we're getting to a point of specificity now that we're gonna go through all this. We got 3 days.
So we're going to keep moving here. We got another protocol coming up, and as well as a break here in a few minutes. So we can always have some of those individual conversations then
And
too.
you have MDE consultants that are going to be walking around the room for 3 days too. So ask us questions as you see us walk around.
Mm-hmm.
If you have questions that are specific to your situation, ask us too, and we are very nice and helpful. I think. Not that I'm biased.
Okay, so this actually brings us to our protocol now. So I think this conversation's already been happening informally, but let's take this protocol an opportunity to kind of check and see where we are with our student growth measurement. Ultimately, what do we like about our system and what do we want to improve? That's what this protocol is all about. So we're going to look at what are our strengths and what are our improvement areas, and also recording some rationale. We do have a document for this, should be in your document set in your packet, as well as, can I hold that one up too? I have it. This green one is just a general action plan. It's just a good one to just keep track of, hey, what needs to happen and who might do it, okay? So this is just a good general one to keep you moving and keep your to-do list organized. And then, thank you very much. And then this is the one that we're going to work on for this protocol, the blue one. So it's what are our strengths, where can we grow, and what's some evidence for those. And then the back is just what resources or guidance might we need. Okay, so this might be where you start logging some of the questions that you're still wondering about. Okay, Brian, do we have a time on this one?
We have 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, talk over your student growth system. What's going well? Where could we grow? And what support might we still need? Questions before we get started?
Okay, so we're coming back together. And we talked about the requirements, state assessment, and student growth data that's locally LEA. And quite frankly, the measurement of student growth for state assessment, because it's us and assessment, right? There's student growth data that's available. Now, you have to be able to manipulate the data, be able to use it for educator evaluation, but it's data that's available at least. Quite frankly, for the most part, that's relatively easy, or at least relatively easier than the extremely complex assessment landscape that we have within each LEA across the 927 LEAs that we have across the state of Michigan. Every district has differing assessments, and they have differing values on those assessments for use to inform their instruction. Right? So the complexities involved with measuring student growth with data that is local to the LEA, there's just way more complexities to it, right? And whenever you have a complex situation, there is not, unfortunately, going to be a one-size-fits-all. Just do this with all of your differing assessments. So MDE has put forth a recommended model that is specifically mentioned within the educator evaluation law. Now, it isn't mentioned to say everybody has to do it, or everybody needs to do it, or even that everybody should do it. It's just mentioned as one of the models that could be used, right? And that model is student learning objectives. So what are student learning objectives? What is that model, and how do you use it to measure student growth for educator evaluations? Student learning objectives are course-long academic goals that are set by a teacher or teacher team. They're designed to monitor students' progress towards growth targets and to demonstrate a teacher's impact on student learning within a given interval of instruction. Right? Now, how I like to describe student learning objectives is that student learning objectives should finish this sentence for all teachers across the state who are at least using student learning objectives. The student learning objectives will answer the sentence, as a teacher, I will consider myself successful if my students are able to, and finish that sentence with data. Right? What do you value? How do you determine success for yourself as a teacher? How do you use assessments to determine your success with your students? Right? If there is a disconnect with how you would finish that sentence and how you're measuring yourself to evaluate your the course of your instruction, how well students have done during your interval of instruction, if there's a disconnect there, then we're not facilitating continuous improvement. We're creating hoops that people are jumping through that has no prayer of providing meaningful improvement for educators across the state. So, student learning objectives are a researched model that have a lot of guidance behind them with the American Institutes of Research, among other organizations, that provide a set of collaborative processes that can help provide common practice while still providing a lot of choice and autonomy to educators to make a system that makes the most sense for educators within a district. So MDE has produced a guidance document for the implementation of student learning objectives. During break, we've put 2 copies of this guidance document on everybody's table. A lot of the content that we're going through over the course of this, at least this day and at least half, if not more, of tomorrow, is centered around this guidance. Now, this is guidance that has been researched and quite frankly written for us by the American Institutes of Research, although we've Michiganized it and provide some specific recommendations for this. But typically you want to be able to follow research and best practice while making sure that it's customized for your environment, and that's what we've done with student learning objectives. We've customized it for Michigan's learning environment and our educator workforce. So why SLOs are not mandated? They are either mandated or recommended for use within educator evaluations in at least 25 states across the country, right? So this has been vetted. by a lot of states, which is also a good reason for them. And why this process, I've talked about why this process is, because it provides flexibility while working towards data comparability. The models being used for student growth across the country are varied, right? There isn't a model. If there, I was telling somebody at the table over on this side, if there were a model that MDE could just give you and say, do this, and you're going to have a great measurement of student growth, we wouldn't have scheduled a 3-day workshop, right? There is a lot of complexities involved here, and there is a lot of different, there's other models that can be used, and they're very viable for use. All have strengths and weaknesses. Some of their strengths are better, some of their weaknesses are worse, right? But there is a lot of different models. There isn't a perfect model, but it is widely in use in a lot of different models across the country, and there is a lot of good practices. Now, whether you're going to make the decision over the next 3 days or today or what have you to implement SLOs or not, there is still a lot of great best practice recommendation and practices that are embedded within the student learning objectives that can inform your work in whatever model that you choose to implement to measure student growth. So this is going to be important and useful information for you, whether you choose to implement student learning objectives or not, because you can use the principles that are detailed within student learning objectives and whatever practices that you choose to implement within your district. So this MDE guidance document was released in October of 2016, and it is available on our website for download for anybody who chooses to download. Within this guidance document, it lays out 11 different decision points that are made when implementing student learning objectives. So there's 11 different decisions that are made, and each one of these decision points has decisions embedded within them. Again, this isn't complex. This is complex. The more that you have conversation around measurement of student growth, the more complexities that get revealed. So, and again, these decision points are important, potentially important for your district, whether you're implementing student learning objectives or not. So talking through these different decision points and that's why we have you come together as district teams, to have a collaborative conversation about these 11 different decision points, so that we're not going to dictate what your answer is, because there isn't a correct answer for each one of these decision points. There is a correct answer for your district, right? So knowing what the decision points are, making informed decisions for each one of these decision points is critical. And having a collaborative conversation for the needs of the educators and students that are within your district is critically important to develop a system that works really, really well for your district. So that's what we're attempting to do here, we're attempting to walk you through these decision points with MDE guidance. Allow you to have the collaborative conversation around these decision points, and then guide you towards decisions that make sense for your district. So these decision points are: determine a district decision-making stakeholders. If you're here, because we do have probably some people in the room who we affectionately call singletons, right? People who came to the workshops without a team, but are planning to bring this information back to the district. Raise your hand if you're a singleton. Yeah, by definition, I just singled you out, singletons, and I apologize for that. But this is also very helpful and relevant for you to be able to make some planning. Hopefully every single group time that you have, you have an opportunity and time to develop planning that you're able to bring back to your district, whether you're a singleton or whether you're a district. But determine what your district making stakeholders are within your district, and develop a team that will be decision makers for educator evaluations within your district, right? So hopefully, if you brought a team, those decision-making stakeholders are at least some of them are at the table, right? If not most, but they may or may not be. you have, unfortunately, some of your, especially your teacher leaders, right, are ones that you peg to do everything. District improvement, building improvement. It's your high-flying teachers, your teacher leaders, that sometimes get pulled in a lot of different directions. So you do got to be mindful of not piling too much on. But at the same time, you want your best teacher leaders to have a say in this as well. So it's, again, finding that balance. There is a lot of these decisions are finding that balance. But again, having conversations around determining this team is important. Developing a communications and monitoring plan. We're going to provide you with time today to work through a planning guide for communications and monitoring. Create an assessment list. These decision points are not all equal. I've already given you a spoiler alert that this is the most difficult one. What assessments are you going to use to determine student growth? Everything gets a lot easier after that, right? And so doing an assessment inventory, what assessments are out there and how do we value it, especially for use within educator evaluations, is an important part of this. Decision point 4, select an approach to SLO development and implementation. So develop an implementation plan and provide guidance and dissemination to your and what decisions are you going to make within writing of student growth goals that you're going to implement within your district. Determine phases of SLO evaluation cycle. Basically, do SLOs. This decision point. Choose the range of SLOs. Are you going to write it for your entire population? Are you going to write it for a chosen segment of population? Is it going to be for trimesters, semesters, whole year? What's the interval of instruction that you're going to define within your goals? Determine the SLO accountability policy. How much autonomy? How much comparability? What is the balance that we're going to strike between those two, if there is going to be a balance? And this is important to have this conversation. We're going to get to that soon. Develop an SLO timeline. You'll see within our table of recommendations that we recommend alignment of educator evaluations and specifically measurement of student growth with your school improvement and your district improvement processes, right? If you value educator evaluations as an improvement process, right? And you have a misalignment between district improvement and educator evaluation, then what you have is you've got some people in your boat who are rowing north, some people in your boat who are rowing west. What does that do to a boat? Spins, yeah. So having alignment between and aligning the timelines and the goals as well for school and district improvement with educator evaluations and the goals set within educator evaluations is very important. Create guidelines for establishing building level teams. What kind of support do we have both at the district in decision point 1 and at the building in decision point 9? Support teachers with ongoing professional development. We have we have some guidance around that that's going to be coming up because this is critically important. Alignment between professional learning and your educator evaluation process, whether that be through your frameworks, within your frameworks, or within your measurement of student growth, there should be alignment because that, again, facilitation of continuous improvement is critical. Developing a data management and technical support plan. How are we going to support this going forward? And how are we going to support this both with leadership and with technology? So we're going to go, what I went through is a 56-page document in about 8 minutes. So probably not all of what I just said made sense. But I'm laying a foundation of prior knowledge for you that we're going to go in through much detail because we're going to go into each one of these decision points over the course of the next 3 days. Most of it in day 1 and day 2. But highlighting what we're going to go through is also important. So MDE has put out within this on page 33, so you all have, raise your hand if you do not have 2 copies of the implementation of student learning objectives recommendations for decision makers. On page 33, there is a table of Michigan Department of Education recommendations for educator evaluations, or for the use of student learning objectives. Now, these recommendations can be extrapolated to general guidance for the use of data that is student growth data local to the LEA and their use within educator evaluations, right? So these recommendations, first and foremost, say that districts and ISDs should use an approach that increases SLO comparability. And that means using student growth data that provides scores that says a score of 65 definitively means more growth than a score of 50, right? And when we began this work, we kind of assumed that teachers would value comparability less and superintendents would value comparability more, but that really hasn't been the case as we've talked to districts across the state. Teacher leaders do like student growth data that does provide an accurate indication of how much growth that their students made, because their students tend to typically knock the ball out of the park. And so, wait, you're going to give me a 3 and you're going to give this other teacher a 3 when we've done, like my students have, just have rocked it? Or, so using data that provides a true indication of growth and provides comparable data is the first recommendation. The next set of 5 recommendations all have to do with integrating measurement of student growth with school improvement process. So we've highlighted 5 different recommendations within this table to say, hey, alignment between your school improvement process, your district improvement process, and your measurement of student growth with eval is really important. And here's how those would align with gather, study, plan, do, and do. Teachers should work together to write student learning objectives in teacher teams during the at least, and I would say maybe even beyond that, at least during the first year of SLO implementation. Later on in this workshop, we're going to have you practice writing an SLO. If anybody's ever written a student growth goal, right, you'll know that it's not super easy, right? Writing a SMART goal, writing a goal that has a baseline and a target and a trajectory of what your students need to, how much growth the student needs to make, they're difficult, right? So work together in teams to be able to write it because you want that, because number one, that will help improve comparability, and number two, that will make it easier, make the lift easier for teachers as they're working on this, especially at first. Districts and ISDs should adopt an individual accountability to SLO scoring. And this has really been a recommendation that that's pervasive across the differing assessment types, because we do recommend this for state assessment as well. And what this means is that the student growth scores should be attributable to the teacher's instruction, not to the teacher last year's instruction, right? It should be part of the success criteria for that teacher. So it should be attributable to the instruction that teacher gave over the course of that school year. So whenever possible, now that isn't to say that you can use a group attributable, so all of our scores across the grade level are this, and therefore we're going to use that data, right? Our mean SGP for an entire grade is this, we're going to use that. But at least a portion, if not a predominant portion, should be should be attributable to the teacher. So that is a recommendation, individually attributable. Districts should select appropriate content-aligned assessments So again, that selection of assessments is critically important. The SLO process should cover the majority of the teacher's interval of instruction from the beginning of the course to the end of the course to capture the breadth of the teacher's entire instruction. Building level SLO team should consist of principal, assistant principal, teacher representative from each grade level or content area, and a special ed representation. Districts select or suggest assessments for SLO that have the greatest reliability and validity. They should have appropriate psychometric properties of the assessments to be used, again, to make sure that we have that comparability. 65 is a true indication of more growth than 50. An SLO approval process is not a solitary event. It's a recursive discussion and collaborative effort between the teacher teams. So if you look at the graphics that are within this document, right, of what is an SLO, and how would you represent this with looking at this graphically, you can see, maybe I should have gone up, that it follows a cyclical problem-solving process. So this would be a typical SLO cycle. You first gather and study student data. You develop your SLO. You submit the SLO for approval. You meet and discuss your SLO progress. You score and discuss your SLO, which then feeds in to your gather and study student data. Now, for those of you who are steeped in multi-tiered systems of support and implementation work, right, does this remind you of anything? It's fairly similar, right, to the MTSS problem-solving process because it's a scientific problem-solving process, right? You identify problems, you develop a plan, you implement a plan, you measure the plan results, and those results inform your next problem-solving cycle. It also follows pretty similarly to this school improvement process, right? And there's a reason for that. Because the upside and the double-edged sword of continuous improvement is, like when I was involved with MTSS implementation, we used to say that MTSS implementation should take 1 to 3 years, right? And then 3 years later, we began saying, well, MTSS really takes 5 to 7 years, right, to implement really, really well. And then after 7 years, well, it's like, it's really 5 to, well, the problem is that MTSS is a continuous improvement process, right? So that means you're never done. In order to do it well, and this is true of educator evaluations, if you are facilitating a continuous improvement process, I hate to break it to you, but you're never done. Continuous improvement means that you're continually doing it because it is something that will improve you year to year and even month to month. And so using a problem-solving process that, because really one of the best things that can possibly come out of an educator evaluation and the use of student growth within an educator evaluation is the dialogue around student growth data between an administrator and a teacher. Right? If you can facilitate a conversation that uses student growth data to inform your instruction, that informs feedback, because that feedback is so critical to helping teachers improve and, quite frankly, helping administrators improve. So this is a cyclical problem-solving process that uses data to provide feedback loops to create an improvement process for teachers and for administrators. And we'll go through all these decision points throughout the course of the next at least 2 days, if not 3 days. Okay, so we talked about these decision points and how we're going to get into more details about the decision points.
So Brian talked to you about some of the roles and responsibilities that would take place within the SLO process and how the team of people would need to be responsible. So let's talk about building that team. So here's some of and we have a form in your handout, or in your packet that, let's see if I can find a color here. It's probably, It's the white one. Thank you. Looks like this. Pretty simple one. And this is a really good one to use on the Google Drive because then you'll have more space if you start typing in. But really what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the important roles and supports that you'll need on an SLO team, and then you can start thinking about who in your local context could help fit that. You might not be able to fill in every one of these roles. Some people's names might go in more than one spot, depending on the size of your system. And hopefully it's just not one person's name all the way down the whole thing, though. Okay, so we need some experts around assessment, right, to help us select effective assessments. We need someone that knows our instructional technology support, whether it's our curriculum or our resources that we have available. We need our educator evaluation specialist, as well as who knows professional development, who plans that professional learning in our system. We need a representation from our local education association to be on board here. If we have our school improvement team or lead on this as well, it's good to have someone from HR. And also if you have a curriculum lead or separate curriculum leads, those are also important people. So these are just some of the big things that responsibilities and inputs that are needed to make a really good SLO team. You need someone that knows curriculum, assessment, the technology.
And it's possible too, if you're a small district, like if you're the superintendent, sometimes you're also the bus driver, right? So it's very possible that you could have one person that holds multiple roles here. But it's important, what's important is that the expertise and perspectives get represented at the district team.
So what will this team do? They're going to help make the decisions that guide the SLO policy for the whole system, because we want some common expectations and parameters around this process. And that's kind of the same idea with creating business rules. What are the timelines and the processes and the steps that we're going to go through? And they're also going to communicate what this is, why we're doing it, how this is going to benefit everyone involved, including the teachers and the students and the administrators, and communicate that out effectively, as well as you go through the school year, the different events that need to happen. This group is also going to monitor the implementation to continue to grow the practice, and also have a plan to help keep the data all organized in a way that makes it efficient for teachers and administrators. Okay? So we need a core group at the district level that's going to support our educator evaluation and specifically support the measurement of student growth. You might already have an existing team that can do some of this. If you're going to leverage your school improvement team, a lot of those names will be in common. If you already have an educator evaluation stakeholder group, they should be pulled over here. Okay? So think about the current structures that you have, the current people that you have in place, and let's try to connect some names with some of these different roles so that you can have support to pull this off in your system. Okay? These people might be here in the room with you today, they might not be, okay? But let's get some names down so you can start thinking about when we return back to our team or our district, who's going to help do this work so that it doesn't just lay idle, right? Okay. We're going to get rolling with the afternoon chunk. We're going to just do a little 5-minute intro, and then we're going to have some more team time. So don't feel like you need to rush what you're doing right now. Just be ready to listen and then be ready to participate here with your team in a few minutes. As we move into the afternoon, well, we finished off the morning chunk with starting to think about how we might build a team to help make some decisions and support this work. Now we're going to start talking about, as we're starting to do the work and we start to move through a typical school year or cycle of evaluation, what are some of the key events that will take place, and how do some of those events align well with some of the other practices that we're already doing around school improvement and educator evaluation, as well as planning for professional development and learning for our teams, as well as our student assessment calendar. So that's really what this next protocol is designed to do, is to help you to look kind of big picture at those different processes and think about where there's some points of overlap so that when we're doing the key activities in one area, we can use that effort or that work in the other area there to try to streamline the work or make it more efficient or manageable. in your packet, or in your folder, there's a yellow packet. And this is, on the front of the yellow packet, it has a few graphic organizers. One is the continuous improvement model that's up here on the slide around the SLO process. You can see next to that one on the handout is the school improvement cycle or graphic. And then across the top is the SLO process laid out sort of month by month across a typical school year calendar. So the conversation that you're going to have with your team is, well, to pull these things off, what are some of the action steps or activities that we need to do, and how can we leverage those to help in those other areas? So it's just a grid or a template or a graphic organizer, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to identify some of those key activities. And again, this is a good one to work on the electronic platform because the cells and everything will grow as you type. And there's also a sample in here that's the last few pages of the document to give you an example of what some of the things are that you might want to think about around aligning. So as we look at, I'm looking at the sample page here where it says the sample SLO timeline. At the beginning of the year, you're gathering and studying student data to help you set goals for educator evaluation purposes. Well, if we think about school improvement process, there's a lot of data collecting and analyzing and goal setting there as well, right? So can we do those things together and set goals at the same time when we're doing those big data digs? Okay, just one example of an area of overlap. I'm still staying right in that beginning of the school year section, but now I'm looking down on the next page towards educator evaluation. I know at the beginning of the educator evaluation is when I'm going to be encouraging teachers to do their self-assessment, and they're also going to be doing some goal setting at that time, right, around professional goals as well as around student growth goals. How does that link with professional development? Could we link in some ideas there around our PLC structures, around a lot of the tables around here? We're starting to talk about, are we going to have to develop some common assessments that we use across departments or grade levels? So how does that fit in here as well? And then the next item is actually the student assessment calendar. So as we start thinking about these things, I'm going to need some benchmark assessments to measure my progress of my school improvement plan. I'm going to need some benchmark assessments to measure the student growth for educator evaluation. I can align those things and have the processes serve more than one purpose. Okay, so the whole point of this protocol is to try to find those connection points so that the work that you do goes farther and doesn't have as many repetitive steps of some of these things to serve all the purposes that we have. Okay, so this is all about trying to make it efficient and more doable in your local context. The last page just has some ideas for things that you might consider, some of those action steps. You will have a much better list than what I've brainstormed on my own here because you've lived it and do it on an annual basis. But here's just some ideas to think about. So ultimately, the idea with this protocol is, again, looking at those big processes that we do annually, how they connect to educator evaluation, and how we can do some of that work at the same time to maybe lighten our load or make our work more efficient. That make sense? Okay. So there's a protocol to guide you. How much time do we have on this one? We have about 25 minutes because this one's a little meatier. Okay, because we got to think about all the steps of school improvement. We got to think about the steps of educator evaluation. We got to think of the steps we do on an annual basis for our professional learning and development calendar. Okay, that's where all these things come together. Questions before we get started? Okay, record your ideas and have some good collaboration. We'll check back in about 20 minutes. Brian and I will be working the room, so raise your hand or signal us over if you'd like some insight or run a question by us. Should be day one. Is maybe like timelines and alignment. Do you see it? Let's see if we can find it. Is that the name of it? Yep, it's in the shared drive on the day one resources. There's a few different copies, whether it's a Google Doc or a Word document, whatever format, but it's called Timelines and Alignment.
So were there any aha moments during this alignment activity for any of the groups that they'd like to share out? Well, it did sound like there was some good conversation that was happening across the room. I won't make anybody We probably will make you, more strongly request large group share out later, but this is all very specific to differing districts. So it's okay. But be prepared later on this afternoon to be called upon if we have difficulties getting volunteers for sharing. Because it really, hearing what other districts are doing is really, really valuable to differing districts. Is something that we found in doing these workshops across the state. So now we're going to talk about assessment criteria for use within SLOs and, in the broader sense, measurement of student growth within educator evaluations. So how do you select assessments for use within educator evaluations? Now, within the SLO implementation guide that MDE produced, decision point 3 is create an assessment list. So when determining what assessments should we use to determine student growth for teacher evaluation or and administrator evaluation, because the law does state that administrators must use an aggregate of the student growth data used to determine teacher evaluation. So this applies to administrator evaluation as well, right? So MDE has provided some guidance for determining, and it's pretty broad guidance, but it is guidance, within Appendix D of that SLO implementation guide, which is any assessment used to measure student growth needs to be valid, which means that it measures what it is intended to measure. Reliable. If you give the assessment 10 times, it provides you with consistent results. Fair. It's free of bias and accessible. It doesn't provide differing results to differing demographics of students, right? And it's accessible to the students who are being assessed. Aligned. And this is extremely important. Reflects the identified standards and provides the range of complexity outlined within those standards. So it measures how you would identify success for yourself as a teacher. What are the standards that you would identify if my students achieve these standards? If my students grow with these standards, they will be successful as a 3rd grader, 4th grader, 11th grader. And so alignment to standards and the standards that determine success for your students is extremely important when determining what assessments that you're using. Do these assessments, are these assessments aligned to the standards that determine your success? So that hierarchy that I provided before is a level of comparability. We said as one of our recommendations that you should, to the greatest extent possible, select assessments or use assessment practices that provide you the greatest amount of data comparability possible. 65 means that that a student made more growth than a score of 50, right? So at what level of confidence do you have in the comparability of your data does depend on the type of assessment that you use, right? Assessments that are given district-wide, such as interim or benchmark assessment, a district-wide rubric, common final exams that are consistent across grade levels or across subject areas, into the national baccalaureate exam. And commercially available assessments can be used for these things. That does help with the data comparability because they've researched that. So these are high levels of data comparability. And you have confidence in the use of these within educator evaluation because of that reason, because it is important to have data comparability. Now, less confidence with their level of comparability is assessments that are created by a school-wide team, such as a common writing rubric, common reading assessments, and team-created content assessments. Now, one of the reasons why this is a little bit lower is it is really hard to write a test. Anybody who's written a test, like I took a graduate level course on it, and it was hard to do really well. In order to do it in a way that, and this is important, to do it in a way that provides you with valid and reliable results, because anybody could create a test, but to create a test that has psychometric properties that are acceptable for use within educator evaluations, that is hard, right? And so developing a test, is even as a school-wide team, is very difficult, but it can be done, and especially if there's a lot of value and there's alignment of assessment items. And there's some good practices that do help, like the use of item banks, right? With inspect or what's the other one that starts with an F? Yeah, within illuminate. Fluence, yeah. So the use of Fluence to give you item bank that do meet valid and reliable requirements, that does help. Just because this gives you a lower level of confidence with your data comparability, does that mean that you shouldn't do this? No, absolutely not. This could be the best choice for your district, but you need to have to make an informed decision based on knowledge of the level of comparability of these types of assessments. These types of assessments is important. Then at the lowest level of data comparability is individually teacher-created assessments such as unit tests, rubrics, and similar assessments. Now, this gives you the lowest level of data comparability and confidence with your comparability. And there's a reason for that, right? I just got done talking about how difficult it is to create a test. Now, if you're doing it in a team, it ups your data comparability. If you're doing it as an individual teacher, now you're almost guaranteed to not meet your reliability and validity criteria, right? Grad level courses make it really hard, and everybody doing this on their own, you have very low confidence of your data comparability. Now, does that mean that you can't use a teacher-created assessment, at least as one of your sets of data that you include with? No, it doesn't mean that you can't use it. It does mean that you put some good thought into how to increase reliability and validity, right? And if you're a French teacher in a small school district, right, every single test that you give is a common assessment, because you're the only French teacher in the entire school district. By definition, if you give a test, it's a common assessment. So, so you may not have a choice. If you teach Japanese, you may not have any other choice, right? And is it valuable to show growth with that Japanese course? Yeah, I think there is good utility in that. So, so it's possible. I'm not saying that you have to, right? But it is possible that a teacher of math in 7th grade may have the capacity for this level of comparability, whereas a teacher of Japanese language may have no other choice but to have this level of. But you have to make choices that are best for you and make district level decisions based on the assessments that you have available for use. So hopefully that made sense. Okay, so. One of the best things, I think, about student learning objective is it provides a systematic way to collaboratively decide on the balance a district wants to have between data comparability and teacher autonomy, right? So it's a really good idea to have collaborative conversations about autonomy, teacher choice, and the assessments that we're using, while focusing on how we can best develop a comparable set of data that can be used within teacher evaluation. So on one side of the spectrum, right, we have set by a teacher team using teacher-created assessments. Low level of confidence in the data comparability, high level of teacher choice, and has its consequences, right? Good and bad, has its consequences. On the high end, we have, we're all using NWA. We're all going to be evaluated based on the NWA results. And if we get this growth score with NWA. All teachers across the entire, within the entire grade level are going to get this rating. High level of comparability, low level of teacher choice has its consequences. Good and bad. They have their consequences. Now, assessments that are student growth targets that are set by assessments and targets set by a teacher or teacher team using district assessment ranking lists. Here's a set of assessments that you can use, and you can choose one of the assessments within this list. That's one way to try to get a little bit more comparable data with having a teacher choice. Assessments and growth targets that are set by a teacher team using a established set of common assessment, provide you with more common comparability with still providing some teacher choice. Again, has its consequences. These are decisions that have to be made, right? If you don't make a decision on this, you will have made a decision. Does that make sense? So, and usually a decision through absentia is usually worse than making a purposeful choice, right? So, where do you want your district to be on the spectrum of comparability and autonomy and choice? There are consequences to this decision. So, we're now going to talk in our groups. Review, we have a, what color is it? We have a worksheet for this. It's blue, and the title is Increasing SLO Comparability. It provides the MDE recommendation that you should maximize the comparability of the data that you can, while still providing some teacher choice. It provides that recommendation in here. But then use this worksheet to have a conversation, discuss the differing subject areas and grade levels that you have within your district that would require different levels of comparability and autonomy. Indicate where your subjects, at this bottom portion here, indicate where your subject areas and grade levels may either be or should be on the spectrum of autonomy and comparability. Okay? So we have 20 minutes for this activity. What questions do you have before we start this activity? This is kind of a high-level thinking activity, right? So it requires everybody's voice to make these type of conversations happen productively. So if there's no questions, I'll be cycling across the room to help with conversations. Let's begin. All right, and I hate to do this again because I know there was some great conversations happening across the room, and we've done this. This part of the workshop 7 times previously, and every single day when we got to this portion, there was some really great conversation happening around the room. But we will be able to readdress this issue later on today too, and this theme is going to continue on through the course of the next 3 days. But now I'd like to talk about the differing purposes of assessment and the differing assessments that we use in our educational environments, right? So we have differing assessments that we use, and these assessments are used for different purposes, and we have a tendency sometimes to use an assessment in a way that was not intended to be used. And when we do that, sometimes we get data that does not inform good decisions. So knowing what the differing types and purposes of assessment are is very important when determining what assessments should be used to determine your success criteria as a teacher, as an administrator, and to determine what assessments should be used for measuring student growth for educator evaluations. So, this is a graphic that I really liked. I got from Heritage. What's your first name again? Margaret Heritage. And she got from somebody named Herman that she works with. And I got her permission to use this slide. I really like it. It was initially designed to provide a representation of a balanced assessment system, right? So, on the left-hand side, you have your student. On the far right-hand side, you have your success criteria, your college and career readiness, or your success criteria for whatever it is that's currently being taught. So on the assessment, and the purpose of assessment, that is closest to the student and has the biggest impact on instruction is classroom formative assessment. Right? A formative assessment is called assessment for learning. But not assessment of learning, assessment for learning, because it's assessment that's used, or it's kind of a process almost, that informs learning on a dynamic, real-time basis. It can be done 7, 8, 10, 20 times within a single lesson. Very dynamic, right? And it is used to determine whether students got it or didn't get it. It is closest to the point of instruction because it is occurring while instruction is occurring, and teachers make dynamic decisions based on this that changes what their instruction is within the lesson. So you're moving forward. Your students are actively involved in this process. It has a huge impact on the success of instruction, right? Has a huge impact on learning trajectory. The next in this is progress monitoring. So progress monitoring provides frequent monitoring of specifically targeted intervention goals, those who are steeped in MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. Know that this is often done with students who are receiving Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention. And it provides you information on a week-to-week basis on learning trajectory, and allows you to make instructional decisions within 4 weeks, within 7 to 8 weeks, right? And you can change instructional programming based on learning trajectories with progress monitoring. So again, close to the student, provides dynamic information and informs instruction and the success of instruction and what instruction that you're given. Then you have classroom summative assessment. So this is how well students did on unit tests, right? On can I move on? Do I need to reteach? Do I need to cycle back? It does provide you with some indication of effectiveness of teaching, but kind of in chunks, right? And so it provides you with kind of a status of learning, but at set terms, right? That are a little bit longer term. It's a little bit further away from the real-time dynamic and changing of instruction, but does provide you with regular indication of success. Then you have your interim or your benchmark assessment. And this is monitor student towards medium-term goals. It could be NWA, it could be a number of different benchmark assessment, could be a number of different benchmark assessment. It provides you with an indication of growth and static achievement. How well are we doing compared to peers, right? And how well did my students grow from the fall to the winter to the spring? And it provides you with indication of success or overall health of your Tier 1 instruction, right? How many students are meeting my growth targets? How many students are meeting my static targets in the fall, in the winter, and spring? Gives you kind of a long-term planning information and provides you with some growth to provide you some success criteria there. It's further away from what happens within the classroom, but it does provide you with some interval of instruction. And then furthest away from classroom instruction and closest to college and career readiness is your summative assessment. And that includes your state assessment, but it also could be your assessments that you give at the end of the year to determine whether the student met the success criteria for whether that be gym, art, social studies, right? It's your assessments that you give at the end of the year to determine whether the students have met the long-term learning goals that you had set forth for them, or the achievement or the proficiency goals that you've set for them near the end of the year. So this assessment provides an indication of your the success that you had within the course of the school year or whatever your interval of instruction is. That is the purpose of summative assessment. Like it or not, that is the purpose of summative assessments, right? Now, the size of the circles within this graph represents the grain size of the number of standards that are included within each type of assessment. You do not measure more than one standard at any one time when you're measuring using formative assessment. You can't. It's impossible. Your summative assessment should include all of the standards that you've identified as for success for achievement within your course, right? You're determining the success of all the things you taught during the course of that instruction. So that should include all of the grain size that you need of standards to consider yourself successful. So the grain size, the number of standards, the number of success criteria that you have at each differing purpose of assessment gets larger as you get away from the student, because you need to be very, very efficient when you are informing your instruction. So these standards change much more quickly, but at any one point in time, these would only be one standard at a time or a couple standards at a time, or success criteria. So one of the reasons why I bring this up is because I think it's just useful as is. But is also to point out, what is it that ties all of these differing assessment types together? What is it that aligns the assessments that have the biggest impact on your students? What is it that informs our instruction? What is it that ties the classroom summative, the interim and benchmark assessment, and our summative assessments together? What is it that ties all of these different assessment types together? Your learning objectives, your learning targets, standards, right? It's the standards that identify your success criteria to the outside world, right? So you should be measuring standards and the success of standards through all of these different types. Now, more standards here than here, but still, there should be alignment. There should be alignment between the assessments that are closest to the student and the assessments that show the outside world the success that you have with your students. And one of the big reasons why I bring this up is when we have conversations about use of state assessment for 4 through 8, sometimes I hear, that's not fair, because I use assessments that are local and that gives me results apple. And we have to use state assessments that gives me result orange. And my response to that is, what? Wait a second, you're getting results orange here? And the assessments that actually have the biggest impact on the student gives you result apple? You're setting your teachers up. You can have the best teacher in the entire world, right? And if they are using assessments that provide you result apple or result orange, either one, and they're using this to inform their instruction and using it on a dynamic basis, right, to inform their instruction. And then if you're using a different set of criteria, a misaligned to what you're using to dynamically instruct your student, and if this is provide you with a different set of results, you could have the best teacher in the entire world, and they will, I guarantee you, get phenomenal results because they're the best teacher in the entire world. The problem is that they will get phenomenal results, Apple, and the assessments that provide the indication of your success to the outside world will be result orange. And so your phenomenal results will not show up in your state assessments. So this is one of the reasons why I think measurement of student growth within educator evaluation is a very good thing. Because if we don't use assessments as part of our success criteria for instruction, we lose the ability to ask when we get a result apple and we get a result orange. We lose the ability to ask why. Because if we're not able to ask why, and if we're not able to engage in creative problem solving, right, for what is our alignment here, we're getting results apple, we're getting results orange. Why is that? And to just assume, it's poor instruction. We want to make sure that we have alignment between what's informing our instruction and what is showing our parents how well we're doing, and state funding and accountability, how that data is showing up. And if we don't check that, then we could have teachers who are getting phenomenal results, but they're just not showing up. So, yeah.
With that frame of mind, I'm just not as familiar with the secondary. How then, as you have teachers and teachers' teams making formative assessments, how good are they at creating those, even interrelated, that are connected to SAT, that we're utilizing as a success criteria?
What a great question.
I feel like elementary kind of, you may disagree with it, but I feel like curriculum programming is set up to say we're successful on one thing, et cetera.
Right.
Secondary is what we have been discussing already.
Right. That's a great question, and I would imagine, and I could be wrong, but we could probably ask that question 100 times, and we might get 100 different answers. And that might not be bad, right? But I think asking that question is a good question to ask. I mean, I think it's a good question to ask. That's not necessarily a question posed to me, right? I would think that would be because I can't give what your responses would be, right? But I think that's a good question to have to discuss at your tables, right? What is your alignment? If you're a secondary, what is your alignment to that? How good are you at using formative assessment to teach the standards that we've identified for success that get measured by the SAT and PSAT? I think that's a question that's best answered at the table level because I don't know what everybody's practices are. I hope there's good alignment there, but and then there's what we think the alignment is and what the actual alignment is. That's why we need the data to be able to answer the question, right? Because ultimately, it's our data that does determine whether or not we can say, no, it's perfect alignment. But if our data tells us a different story, then that question needs to be reinvestigated, or at least I think should be. That's personal opinion. That's not anything within legislation, obviously. Yeah.
Okay, so if we go front to back and back to front, so the people that are creating the test for Ready for Success and Summited, are they aligning it correctly for us beginning people?
That's another great question.
I feel that, like I did the M-STEP first time this year, and I thought the questions didn't match up anything that I was being asked to teach. Like, what is the analysis of this answer? And you're like, that's not even a word or a question I asked my third graders. So now do we have to change the beginning formative assessments? Because, gosh, by 9 months, I better have that summative thing ready for success. I feel like somebody that's doing this and doing this needs to get together. And the second comment is sometimes I think the core curriculum isn't necessarily matching up to developmental age appropriateness. So now we're being asked to teach something that's a little bit higher level for that child at a first grade level. And it confuses the teacher because you see the confusion on the student's face, and you know somehow that formative assessment, summative, whatever we just said that was, now I'm going to be forced to get them up there, and it's very confusing, but you feel successful in your own right because you think, well, if they're not ready, I'm going to teach this, and they're showing growth. But
Right.
gosh, I don't know if they can get there yet because it's confusing for them because they're 6.
Right.
I'm asking to break up 13 plus 3 to be 10 plus 4. Whatever
Right.
it is. Whatever. Break up 11 plus 3 to be 10 plus 1 plus 3, and they don't really know that 6 plus 4 is 10 yet.
Right. Right.
So I think that there's a disconnect sometimes from the people here and us down here.
Right.
Not
This.
necessarily the teacher's fault, it could be the system.
And this is why having a collaborative process where teachers are involved in the conversation of what assessments are used to determine their success criteria, I think is important. Because I would love to say, like, there's no way a principal can be an expert in all of the subject areas they are responsible for, right? It is just, they need teacher leadership to help with being an instructional leader. Like, we can say, no, a principal should be an instructional leader. But without any support, that's an almost impossible task. We need to collaboratively work together to be able to make sure that we have alignment with the assessments. We're using the assessments in the way that they are intended to be used, right? And that our assessments will accurately predict or align with each other in the way that we would expect them. We should never get to a summative assessment and be surprised by our results.
Well, who's supposed to have that answer? The principal? Like, are they supposed to get it?
There is,
On what that test might look like?
anytime you point a finger, there's 4 fingers pointing back at you, right? So we all share responsibility in our results. That's why the principal eval law says that they're to use the aggregate of the student growth data that the teachers are responsible for. So we should all be working together, right, to determine the assessments and how we're informing instruction and what our success criteria is. Does that make sense? And I should get to this next part too, because I'm going to keep going. Because all of these questions are best answered within your table. So that brings us to our next group, and I'm afraid that we may not have enough. What does assessment alignment look like within the differing subject areas and grade levels within your districts? Has your district investigated alignment of assessment used for the purpose of informing instruction and the instructional decisions to standards that determines the success of your summative assessment? So let's spend 5 to 10 minutes at the table, and I'd like, just to warn you, I'd like a large group share out after our 5 to 10 minute small group discussion. What questions do you have before we begin our small group work? Okay, let's begin. Let's come back together as a large group. And so I'd like to extend your small group work and have a bigger conversation along the large group level. Whether it be aha or whether it be a good decision that was made at your table, but what along the themes of alignment of the differing purposes of assessment. What were some good points that got brought out at your table? Can anybody volunteer? What are some good discussions that you had? What are some good discussion points that you had at your table? Yes, thank you.
So I just think that, at our table, we have our district-wide team, administrative team here, and so we have elementary and secondary. So what we feel that we really need to work on really helping our teachers to really focus in on the standards rather than their packaged curriculum that they're using or some activities that they've been doing for, for several years. They just really enjoy doing, but really getting back to just kind of some root work of looking at identifying the essential standards, and then from there really working on some common formative assessments, and then really looking at assessment, the continuum of assessments, so that there is a solid alignment. And we knew that this is some work we needed to do as a district, and so it's just even more eye-awakening to have these conversations. Say, yeah, this is really hard work, but it's necessary work. So, and we, just trying not to set our teachers up, kind of comparing the apples to oranges.
Right.
We have awesome teachers, we know that, but they're not seeing the end result as much as what we know we have the capacity to do. And so, it's just really getting to the bare bones of what we really need to do, which is kind of back to the basics in a sense.
Great, thank you.
It's going to be more personal for me because I'm secondary science, but I think that the discussion that we had, and I think the discussion that's shared is, like, you talk about the continuum with what matches up at the beginning to what matches up at the end. And realistically, in secondary, English and math are, I don't want to say one-to-one, but it's much easier. The stockpile that I can pull from is there. Whereas with secondary science, I teach physics. And if I'm expected to go, I'm going to go depth on standards, not breadth, but I have to cover a certain amount of standards. But I'm also not an expository reading teacher. So the whole aggregate, like we had a conversation with Joe, the whole aggregate issue I take serious issue with. But then if I look at math, well, physics is more akin to math. Well, I touch all of 2 algebra standards. Like we pulled it out as a department. I touch all of 2 of something like 20 algebra standards over the course of the year. So it's, without making my assessments carbon copies of cluster questions literally every time, what can I do as a secondary science teacher? Because the SAT is a math and a reading test, whether we like it or not. Like that's what, and the science and the social studies section on the SAT is a glorified reading test. Mm-hmm. So what can I do? And like I said, I'm going to be very secondary, non-math or English, because I look at my gym teachers or my music teachers or my, like, pick something that's not math or English. How do you find alignment that is equitable for those people without, like, without putting overdue stress on them? Well, I know you teach physics, but you also have to teach expository reading. I know you teach social studies, but you also have to teach data analysis when that's not where your forte is. And not saying that people who just do English and math, that's where their forte is, but they touch those standards every day where I don't. I used to touch Huskies, and now I have to wrangle with this monster that is the NGSS. Mm-hmm. Sorry, soapbox.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, it's complex, right? And so putting the complexity of thought into planning that meets the complexity of the actual real world issues, it's important, and it requires planning. Yeah.
So I didn't really get this into the conversation, but I'll add it to it now. I teach Spanish secondary, ninth grade, and for me, the whole assessment process is almost a hindrance to learning, because really in the classroom you're instructing almost all the time, and then the students are giving you feedback. When I give a student a formative assessment or a written, let's just say a written assessment, albeit short, they can do great. They can do great on a written test with you, and then you come up to the oral test or the reading test, and it's a complete blunder. So it's like, how do you align? And our curriculum is aligned to the state standards for world language and Spanish, but how does that show when the students are assessed? It's kind of a conundrum.
Well, and the use of formative assessment is really more inherent to the lesson, right? It's not did a student achieve a criteria or not. It's really more built within the lesson. So a lot of times, really good teachers do formative assessment without necessarily even knowing they're doing formative assessment, right? Because you're doing comprehension checks. You're doing checks of understanding. It's built dynamically within a good lesson. So it's really more dynamic. It's almost more of a process, as is explained by the FAST people, than it is a test that you're given, or even an exit slip that you give at the end of the lesson. So, which is really kind of more summative for the course of for the lesson for that day. So it's almost more of alignment of instruction than it is to your success criteria, right? And if you're finding that the alignment of your instruction, if there's a misalignment between instruction and what's showing, or how you're determining your standards, right? Or the assessments you're determining for the success of your standards, then that's going to have a real world impact. So making sure that there is alignment there, or working towards that alignment, is a worthwhile goal if those summative assessment results are important to you. And I can guarantee they're probably important to your district. They're important to your school building, because parents make choices on where to move based on those results. So, maybe for Spanish, very well could for a lot of families. So it's important for all subject areas to have alignment between instruction and those summative assessments, because it's your determinant of your success criteria. So, but it's not easy. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it. But it takes some purposeful planning, and it takes reverse engineering, right? What are the standards, number one? And now reverse engineer how can we do some collaborative problem solving within our instruction to be able to get to those standards, so that it shows up when it comes time to those summative assessments. It's hard, and it takes a lot of work, but man, does it pay off with improvement of scores on those summative assessments.
I was just going to say, from an elementary perspective, and you take this thing, so this is 306, the reading bill, where it's mandatory that children read by 3rd grade, and you have to have a built-in set of assessments. You have to constantly monitor your instruction literally on a daily basis. So I think it might be less cumbersome to have aligned assessments in the younger grades. The challenge is, okay, so what happens after PO6? Does it take further legislation to say when a child reaches another grade, they must read at another level? It's as if there are some mitigating motivation, then we figure out a way to get it done. And I think what also happens too is that, especially in elementary world, we view ourselves as reading teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just have to learn how to live with that dichotomy, is that we have content, but yes, we do teach reading.
Right. Yeah, and reading is, learning how to read is more of a process, which is different than content delivery. It's the mechanism that the content gets delivered.
So how do you integrate those?
Right. It takes
Chicken or the egg?
Yeah, and both. Yes. See, all the above. Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that input, guys. That was really, I think that was helpful. Did everybody hear that on the other side? No? Oh. Well, it'll be on the video. So just to broadly summarize, it's important to be a reading teacher and a content teacher at the elementary level. And alignment of instruction itself is important with high-stakes summative assessment. It's a way overly broad generalization of what was discussed. So in keeping on kind of the subject of what do you use to determine your success criteria, right? When state standards are available for specific courses, how many domains or standards should be included within a student learning objective? How many should be included with the goals that you're setting to determine your success criteria? So district and school improvement teams may inform the standards, what standards that we're selecting, because all of them simultaneously, it's as your success criteria, that might be too much. What is the standards? What are the domains that you would set as a district or school improvement team or for a teacher to determine your success criteria, to set your goals, and alignment to district or school improvement goals is strongly encouraged. So, what are the standards that you've set forth to determine your success criteria for your school? And is there alignment between that within your educator evaluation and your school improvement? That creates that alignment that helps eliminate duplicative effort. So when state standards are available, how many domains or standards should be included within your goals? And then, that's the easy question. That's almost the easy part, unfortunately. When state standards are not available, which they aren't for many of our subjects, when state subject standards are not available for specific courses, have we identified other standards that teachers can refer to, such as professional or national standards, and are there assessments that reflect those standards? So without state standards, what is the success criteria that you use to determine whether you are successful or not at the end of the interval of instruction? Now, this is a difficult question to ask, right? And it's an easy question to ask, more difficult question to answer. And this work might need to be done within PLCs to be able to answer it, right? If a district does not have sufficient or staffing, right? So somebody here was a Spanish teacher, right? So if you're from a small district, you may not be able to get with other Spanish teachers. But if you don't have sufficient staffing or resources within your district, getting together at an ISD or region level might be a good idea to have these conversations with too, right? So if you function well at the ISD level or RESA level. So let's have this discussion in our groups. If you have, for the subject areas where you have standards available, how many domains or standards would be included within a student learning objective or teacher goals for student growth? And for the subject areas that you don't have state standards available, what are the standards or success criteria that you do use to determine success criteria for those subject areas? Okay, so what questions do you have for the small group work? Okay, let's begin. Okay, so I think we've had some really good discussion at the small group level, and now it's time to develop a product and plan for your district that you can take and you take it back to your district and directly inform your work. So we mentioned multiple times this morning how important it was to develop a list of assessment or an assessment inventory and prioritize those assessments and use teacher expertise to describe the instructional relevance and the fit for educator evaluation and the measurement of student growth for educator evaluation. So now we're going to develop a list. We're going to work on developing an assessment inventory. So some caveats as we enter into this work. Raise your hand if you believe we test too much within our current educational environment. I think that might have been the first time we got a completely unanimous agreement today. And I think everybody agrees. I think we test too much within our educational environment. So the purpose of this is not to try to figure out a new assessment to give for the purpose of educator evaluation. That's not why you do student learning objectives. It would be counterproductive to student learning objectives. The purpose is to find out if we test too much already, what assessments are we currently using that will fit this purpose, right? And if we're testing, what is the instructional relevance to be able to define our success criteria? I've talked with Paul Salah at Wayne Risa about the development and use of assessment inventories for this, and he said that when he's got done this with districts, oftentimes we find out, okay, what's the instructional relevance of this assessment? What is the fit for educator evaluation? And why are we using this assessment? And if the reason you're using an assessment is because we gave it last year, then consider getting rid of an assessment. Because goodness forbid that if you find that nothing will work with the current assessments that you give, and you have to add an additional assessment to be able to have a good indication of growth. And again, that should not be the end result of this at all. And that's counter what we're doing here. But if that is a result, then you should, if you add any new practice, you should get rid of 2 existing ones in order to do a new practice well. If you do have to add a new assessment, then you should be able to get rid of 2 assessments. Because if you don't have any current assessments that can inform student growth, then you probably are giving some assessments that you don't necessarily need to be giving. Anytime you do a new anytime you introduce a new educational practice, you should get rid of 2 current ones in order to make any new one more successful. And again, that's not why we're doing this. What we're doing is we're taking a list of all the assessments that we're currently giving for the subjects and grades, and we're determining what ones are a good fit for measurement of student growth, what ones have the greatest instructional relevance, what ones have the greatest fit for determining our success criteria. Okay? So everybody has within their packets a assessment inventory, both a blank assessment inventory and I believe, if I remember correctly, a worked example. Oh, it's on the second page. Any kind of a worked example. Right? I would imagine probably, because there's so many different assessments out there, every district's assessment inventory is going to be different. But this worked example is a all-encompassing, it is not an all-encompassing list of possible assessments that could go into an assessment inventory that do provide you with an idea of what we'd be looking for. Now, with this activity, I would recommend you using the electronic version of this document because I have terrible handwriting and it is a personal weakness of mine and I could not possibly write legibly within these little squares. So I would recommend using the electronic version that's available in that Google Share Drive to be able to complete this document. And what you're going to be asked to do is to type in probably the assessment name, the entity that is requiring it. Is it the building? Is it the district? Is it the ISD? Is it the state? What is the entity that's requiring this assessment? Is it the teacher? It could be the entity. What grade level or grade levels does this assessment test? What is the course or subject area used for this assessment? What is the reason for the assessment? What is the assessment type? And we've left the assessment types up here. Formative, progress monitoring, universal screen mirror, interim benchmark, summative. What is the alignment to the standards or skill? And this could be a broad, you don't have to identify what the standards are, but you can write in a little short narrative here. And then, using a 1 through 5 rating, determine, and this is where your teacher input is going to be critical and important, and your instruction, and your principals as instructional leaders too. what is the teacher-determined usefulness for informing your instruction? 1, not useful. 2, seldom useful. 3, somewhat. 4, useful. 5, very useful. And then a general statement about the assessment quality. Okay? So, if you could work to complete this for your district to the greatest extent possible. It's possible that you might have to have this as homework if you don't have the instructional leaders for all of the subject areas at your table, right? But what a good activity, because if the end result of this is that, wait a second, we're giving this because we gave it last year and no other reason and it doesn't have instructional relevance, why are we giving it? Wait, let's gain back some of our instructional time. If that's the end result, that's a great end result, right? So what questions do you have about completing this assessment inventory? Okay, let's begin. Okay, so I want to point out a faux pas that I made earlier today that got pointed out, and I'm glad that was pointed out because I know better. It's one of those things that you learned and then you become a consultant and you forget. I referred to gym teachers. Yeah, and I apologize again. I know better, right? Gym is a place that you go to. Physical education is a subject that you teach. So I apologize for that. I knew better, and I'm glad that somebody did point that out to me because it was a faux pas, and I want to earn my faux pas. Continuous improvement, right? But hopefully that provides you. We will readdress assessment inventory again tomorrow and the day after. And hopefully this is also this could be an activity that you bring back to your district, right? This could be PLC work. This could be a school improvement work or district improvement work that you do as well to discuss your differing assessments, your differing types of assessments, and the use of assessments as you're developing plans for implementation of student learning objectives or whatever student growth model that you will be implementing within your districts. So now we're going to talk and shift gears a little bit to talk about development of the success criteria and the use of student growth baselines to measure student growth. So this is from a Massachusetts document, I think it was, describing implementation of student learning objective. But this is also from the American Institute of Research. When writing SLOs, the teachers ask themselves the following 3 questions. Number 1, what are the most important skills I want my students to attain by the end of my interval of instruction? Where are my students now with respect to the objective? And based on what I know about my students, where do I expect them to be at the end of the interval of instruction? So again, when writing SLOs, student learning objectives should be the end of the sentence. As a teacher, I consider myself successful if during the course of instruction my students are able to. And you finish that sentence with data. That's what student learning objectives are all about. And so in my, whether that be my work with multi-tiered system support and use of data to measure growth within MTSS, or response to intervention, or whether it be special education, whether it be general education, when you find yourself having a difficulty with writing a good growth goal, right? Student growth is defined as the change in scores between at least 2 or more different data points, right? So you can't have growth without 2 or more data points, right? If you have difficulty writing a good goal, it could be that you have an ill-defined baseline. So writing a good baseline or having a good baseline, where are the students? Where are the students at the beginning of your interval of instruction is critical to being able to identify what a good growth goal is, right? You can't, if you were to type up how to get to a location, and if you were to use GPS, right? And if GPS didn't know where you were currently at, there was no way that GPS would be able to provide you with good directions to get to the destination you want to go to, right? So, in order to write a good goal, you first have to have a well-defined baseline, a baseline that passes the street test, which means anybody walking in off the street can know exactly what that score is and what that baseline is. So, districts should define parameters of student growth measurement that reference to determine database criteria for categories of teacher effectiveness. So the use of baseline data that describes demographic performance and differentiated baseline scoring is encouraged when available. So each student is going to enter a class differently, right? So I was talking about a music class, right? You could have a music class where the end goal is to perform a piece of Brahms, right? Some of your students walking into your class are already performing Brahms, right? Some have just performed chopsticks. And so the achievement of being able to play Brahms, and that achievement is going to be different. The growth is going to be different than that student walking in only having played chopsticks, right? So knowing what is a good growth, what is a good goal to set, knowing where you are at the interval of instruction is critically important. You need, chopsticks is a differentiated baseline than Brahms. So the growth and defining that growth and what is good growth is important. You first need to know where the students are at. So goal setting becomes significantly easier when measurable baselines are obtained. Now, what is adequate growth, or what is good growth? How much growth should students make? These questions are more easily answered when you have assessments that have already researched these questions, right? Now, it's not that they can't be answered using non-vendor provided assessments, but it is helpful when that work is already done. There are vendor provided assessments that provide you that for ELA and math, not quite as much for social studies, right? Does anybody know of a social studies assessment that provides you with what is a year's worth of growth in social studies? Darn, I hope if I keep asking that question, somebody will be able to, oh yeah, no, it's the social.
I've heard him ask at least 10 times.
Yeah. Nobody, not yet. Nobody. So the use of district, building, grade level, or teacher-specific historical and trend data may be used to establish attainable yet rigorous goals. So it is really hard to set a good goal when you're giving a teacher-made assessment for the first time. I hate to tell you this, but any goal that you set is going to be guessing. You can use teacher expert judgment to determine those goals, but if you're given an assessment that you developed for the first time, and it's the first time you've ever given it, any goal that you set is going to be a guess. Hopefully an educated guess, but it's going to be a guess. There isn't a statistical method that you can use that will make it that much better than this method. But if you have given that assessment at least one prior year, then you have historical data that you can use to set a attainable yet rigorous goal. So there are assessment vendors that provide student growth guidance for their assessments, and hopefully maybe the assessment inventory that you were just working on would list some, but some, and this is certainly not an all-inclusive list, right? NWA, STAR, FastBridge, iReady, universal screener vendors, Ames Web, Dibbles, many others. Provide some research as to what is a good growth. What is a year's worth of growth? And we'll provide you what the goals are, giving very different baselines. So a student who has much lower score, you would expect them to have a little bit more growth. What is the growth of a student who are already advanced? That's probably different than students who are not proficient, right? And these are all factors that have been researched by these vendors. Some better, some worse, but they have at least been researched. Now, when using assessments where no student growth criteria or guidance is available, districts should use resources to help determine what is appropriate growth criteria. What score should we expect giving differing baselines? And that can be difficult. There are differing resources that help educators set these growth criteria, and the use of data warehouses such as Illuminate, IDEX. Now I should add into this list too because they've delved into this, and Munetrics. Set normed or criterion goals for differing baselines and targets. So there are some resources out there that can help with setting goals for student growth data, but it's not easy. So in an effort to help districts, and specifically, develop set growth targets in a way it's assessment agnostic, right? Illuminate or NWA set growth targets using their assessments, right? It's very, very specific, and that's been researched very, very specific to that. But in an effort to help districts write goals for in an assessment agnostic way, using comparable procedures and practices with greatly varying different assessments. We developed a student growth calculator tool, the MDE SLO student growth calculator tool, where you can plug in previous year's pre-test and post-test scores, and it will automatically calculate student growth goals based on how your students have done in the previous year or previous years. So let me demonstrate it for you. I'll admit it. I wrote this tool. I like to try to say, if you like this tool, I wrote it, and if you don't like it, Joe wrote it. But it's mine. What I'd like you to do, if you have a laptop, open it up, because I can show you, I can demonstrate, I can explain it, but there's nothing like manipulating it and doing it yourself to learn. It will make a lot more sense. And even if you wanted to put your own data in, that would probably be helpful too. So you can click on this SLO link, but actually I think what I'm going to do is show you where it's publicly available. If you go to the MDE-Edevals website, which everybody's bookmarked now, right? If you go to michigan.gov/MDE-Edevals, it'll take you to our educator evaluation website. If you click on student growth underneath where it says educator evaluations, it takes you to our educator evaluation website. It gives you approaches to measuring student growth. This SGPs is a model for measuring student growth for state assessment. And this is what we're talking about right here, student learning objectives. This is the data local to your LEA. So if you click on student learning objectives, data that's local to the LEA, it will bring up a spreadsheet. No, it's going to bring you just to a website. It's not even bringing you to a spreadsheet. There we go. I don't know why that didn't work. So now, here are some of the resources that we've already been talking about, student learning objective resources. So if you scroll down, there is a file called SLO Student Growth Measurement Tool with example data. So if you click on that, and then open that file, it will bring up the MDE SLO Student Growth Calculator tool. Raise your hand if you need help getting to this location. Okay, everybody there?
Brian goes there in his sleep, so not everyone's just
Yeah. Okay, so now what you see in front of you is the MDE SLO Student Growth Calculator tool. You're probably going to want to click Enable Editing depending on your protections. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you have prior year, you have from last year, you have pre-test and post-test data. Okay, let's just assume that you do. So the first thing that you would do, if that is the case, is you would go to, there's tabs. The first tab is a set of instruction. Then, I wish I would have named this easier to pronounce, set success criteria here. Try saying that 5 times fast. Score entry sheet, SLO results report, and SLO assessment scores from last year and the year previous. So if you go into SLO assessment scores from last year, it gives you the opportunity to copy and paste student names, pre-test scores, and post-test scores. Now these would be in sets, right? Because you can't put in a pre-test score without a post-test score. Because the purpose of this assessment is to determine what the changes in scores were for differing assessments from the previous year. So student 1 had a pretest score of 60 and a post-test score of 82, which is a change in scores of 22. So after you put in the pretest scores and the post-test scores from previous years, right, it automatically calculates what those changes of scores was. And what that does is it creates a range of pretest scores. So, for this, whatever assessment that it was, students who within this classroom or within this grade level, students who on the pretest score between the 1st and 20th percentiles on the pretest, have a score range between 15 and 33. Students who score between 15 and 33 on a pretest have an average score change of 35.3. Students who are between the 21st and 40th percentiles on the pretest score, they have a pretest score range of 33 to 47. Students who score between 33 and 47, they have an average score change of 35.64. So on and so forth, all the way down to the 81st to 99th percentile on the pretest score, they have a score range of 51 to 77. That is, the students who score within that range, they have an average score change of 5.1. Okay? So, now we get to 18-19. That was 17-18 data. Now we get to 18-19. Now, John Doe's class, or wait, Jane Smith's class. Oh, wait, no, I used that name too. Anyway, this teacher's class now. Now, Jane Smith, for the current year, Jane Smith is a student in the current year. Jane Smith achieves a pretest score of 22, right? From previous years, students who achieve a score between 15 and 33, they have an average score change from pre-test to post-test of 35.3. Well, Jane has a score of 22, which automatically, so if we were to put in another student with a score of 22, automatically a success criteria determined growth target, growth expectation gets entered in for Jane. Jane scored 22, which is between that range. So we would expect, if she were to just meet the criteria that we've seen from previous years, we would expect her score to increase by 35.3. 35.3 plus 22 would give us an expected post-test score of 57.3. So, if Jane achieves a score, which she did here, of 78, she would have met her objective. She met the average changes in scores for her differentiated range from previous years. Now, if Jane achieved a score underneath 57.3, she would have not met her objective. Her growth was less than the average growth for her differentiated range. So that would not meet that objective. And then, so then what happens is, you total up the number of students who are included within this SLO. The only thing that's editable on this sheet is a description of the SLO, right, which would be right here. But the automatically totaled up is the number of students included within, that are included within your SLO, the number of students who either met or exceeded growth targets, the percent of students who met growth targets, and then, based on criteria that you set here, what is the percent, excuse me, what is the percent of students that you want to meet prior year score averages? What is the percent of students do you want to be average? If you have a normal curve, right? If you're not continuously improving, but if your students do just as well last year as they did this year, that would be 50%, right? 50% of students meeting average, previous year averages, would assume a normal curve. Not necessarily an improvement, but not less than improvement either, right? And so by default, this is set at 45% because we need to give teachers the benefit of the doubt. We also want some confidence interval for especially teacher-developed assessment that don't have maybe the psychometric properties that they really probably should have. But just clearly identifying what we want, what is the percent of students we want to meet differentiated averages, provides us with an opportunity to choose our assessments, but have practices that provide comparable data across grade levels. So you can have your choices of assessment, assuming that you use a pretest and post-test model, even using different assessments that provide a range of scores, right? Your first assessment has to have a lower score than your post-test score. But it provides you with a criteria. Instead of comparing a teacher for their growth against teachers in East Grand Rapids or West Bloomfield or Austin, Texas, your criteria now is, how well did I do? How well did my students do last year and the year before? I'm going to set a goal to do at least as well and hopefully better. Right? So you're no longer competing with other people. You're competing with yourself to develop a continuous improvement process to get better. And these are adjustable targets that you can set at the district level to say, what is the percent of students we want to meet average growth targets? 45%, 50, if you do change this, right, then it will change what the growth expectation is in this SLO results report. Whereas before it said 45 to 65%. Now it says 50 to 64%. So you can adjust this to, based on a collaborative conversation at the district level. What is the percent of students do you want to meet or exceeds previous score previous score averages? What is the expectation there? Now, if you want, you can also choose to exceed prior year score changes by a set percent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. And you can see here what that does to Jane Smith's goal. Before it was 35.6. And now I said I want to increase scores by 5%, and now it's 37.07. So if you have 2% of your students who are proficient and growth is needed immediately and nothing less is acceptable, then setting a growth expectation that might be a district decision, right? But in general, I would advise giving teachers the benefit of the doubt because things are difficult enough. So now there are also other models that are described within this tool, and I don't like any of the other ones because there is just a simple average, right? So the average for the growth over the course of the last 2 years is 23.9, and now everybody's expected to grow by 23.9. The only reason you would do that is if you were doing this for a small number of students, because these differentiated ranges break down if you have less than 13 or 14, less than 13 students. And then you also have a proficiency score that you could set, right? We want everybody to achieve a post-test score of 80 regardless of where they were at, because who cares about differentiating anyway? But it doesn't take into account the pretest score. Is this really growth? No. You would only use this method if this is the first time you've ever given an assessment, and it would be better than the other choice, which is literally throwing a dart against the wall. You're setting a target at least to shoot for. And so this is only recommended if you have never given an assessment ever before and you have no historical scores to set more accurate growth targets. The use of a group effect size, that will provide you with those who are engaged in John Hattie's school improvement work. It overestimates growth though, so I don't necessarily recommend the use of that one. And this is really statistical gobbledygook. Don't even pay attention to this last one. It's the use of standard deviations and multipliers on standard deviations to set test scores. You don't want me to go into that one. So, but I do recommend the first two, the meeting prior year score changes or exceeding prior year score changes, because that does set good, tangible student growth goals that are differentiated and based on the student scores from previous years to set student growth criteria. So you're using the performance of previous cohorts to say what are my goals for this current year and how much growth should I obtain and how much growth should my students obtain, giving a differentiated set of skills at the beginning of the interval of instruction. Yes, Lisa.
Can you speak to the first one?
Meeting prior year score changes?
So if I have a teacher who exceeds growth with all the smart kids, but has very little growth with the low achievers, and a goal is set that this next year you just have to have your kids do just as well as you did last year. That sounds to me like a disservice to student learning. How does this protect against and get at, because I think the end result is we want, in utopia,
Right.
all kids to be achieving at 80%.
Well, number one.
I understand the proficiency.
Yeah, no. And no, that's a great question. And number one, first step is bring light to the performance at the differing percentile ranges. Number one, does your teacher know that she's doing great with the high kids and not good at all, not meeting growth criteria for the low kids? If you don't know that, you can't correct it. So using a tool that does shed light on how you're doing, what's the percent of goals that are met, what kind of growth are you seeing with your lower achieving students versus your higher achieving and your middle students. It's a growth tool that actually helps inform your success with those differentiated ranges. So just number one, identifying that, right? MTSS problem solving, right? Problem identification has to come first, or else you don't have problem solving. So one thing, well, the fact that you're not meeting growth criteria for the students who are on the low end of your ranges, that itself is a natural consequence. But another thing that you could do is there's a second SLO goal success criteria where you can use a group targeted criteria. So your students who are between your first and 20th percentile, you would expect more change for them based on what you've seen in previous years. And now you can see here, it sets another set of criteria so these students are essentially counted twice. So now, because it is really important to improve the students who are based on what you've just identified, Lisa. And now, these students are now identified as additional students, essentially, within the SLO, and informs your success criteria. Now the overall SLO score is 2.69 because their success criteria, you've only met 20% of the targets for the low students. So you can target different segments of the population. Now let's say you need work with students who have IEP. You need to target your students with IEPs, right? So you can individually select targets, students with the SLO and say we need to improve theirs by, 3%, right? Because our students with IEPs have historically low scores. And now you can target by toggling yes or no to individually select students, and they would then be counted essentially double within this. Now, you don't have to do this secondary SLO. In fact, many times I don't present that functionality because it's another layer of complexity, and there's probably a lot of people in the room that's just said, what? As I was presenting the first time. So I developed this tool at the request of Pam Alfieri at Traverse Bay Area ISD, who said, I need a tool that can do this, right? And I said, okay, I'll find one for you. And I researched, and I looked at other states, and I researched, and there was nothing available. So I said, okay, I'll make one. And so I showed this to Pam Alfieri, and there was like 5 minutes, it felt like, of radio silence. And I said, oh my goodness, I just spent 2 months, I wasted 2 months of my life. And then eventually, after 5 minutes, she's like, I think I love it, Brian, but I think you're going to have to explain it to me again. And then I showed it to our regional liaisons for the different prosperity regions across the state. Again, 3 or 4 minutes of radio silence until Pam said, Brian, explain it to me again, because the second time it made total sense to me, and I know everybody's going to have to listen to it again. So sometimes there is some complexity involved, but it's simple complexity. Once you actually use the tool, put your students' scores into it, then it makes a ton of sense. But before you put any data into the tool, it doesn't make as much sense. So I usually don't even go into that secondary analysis, because the primary analysis is a bit of a head scratcher at first, because it's a different way to look at data than sometimes we do use it for. But if we say that continuous improvement is the most important thing about educator evaluations, and I've been sitting up here on that pulpit all day long, right? Then developing a tool, a student growth measurement tool, that says as its criteria, how well did I do last year? Let's shoot for just a little bit better. Then now you're putting your money where your mouth is. Now you're saying our criteria is continuous improvement, right? And you also eliminate the competitiveness that happens between teachers. Now you can also do this. You can enter in the prior year scores for the entire grade level. If you do want to increase the data comparability, it's actually not a bad idea. And then you can use the entire grade level's scores to set the score entry sheet for a single teacher or the whole grade level. It's up to the district choice. But it does provide a way to use local data and a hopefully common assessment, but if not, not. But hopefully common assessment to provide teachers choice of differing assessments in a way that uses data comparability within teacher choice to set student growth goals that facilitate continuous improvement. Yeah.
Okay. So is it possible to then, if your district wants to measure all the entire grade level,
Mm-hmm.
but individual teachers need to input their info, will they get access to the entire district, or can you separate the type of information an individual can see versus the district?
Well, and this is a spreadsheet.
Okay.
So what you see in it is what you enter into it. So you would take your data warehouse or your student information system, right, wherever your scores are, copy them and paste them. So you have, the good news here is you have complete and total control over what you see and what gets entered within the tool. The downside is, right, and the manual labor that would be involved in this. So I've been working with Illuminate to replicate this tool. And they have replicated a portion of the tool, but unfortunately the portion of the tool that they have replicated so far is this model versus this model, and partially because it was really hard to do. This took me, there's 17 different cascading if-then statements. It was really hard to program this. But they have a goal of replicating this success criteria, this model, by next school year. So, and that should provide some automation. And I think Munetrix and IDEX might be working on it too. I haven't talked to them in a little while about this one. So, and I think I saw another hand over here. Yeah.
So, I'm going to back up a little bit to make sure I understand this. So you set your SLO based on your pretest data.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go in but the standards that you might be testing could be multiple. But if I'm looking at your SLO and I'm putting the entire test score in there, how is that measuring just your SLO and not the entire test?
So it would be multiple SLOs based on what the test is covering.
Yeah, you would, the identification of standards, right, is to help you identify what assessments that you're using to measure the growth, right? Because you want to make sure that the assessments you've identified are representative in whatever assessments that you're using to measure student growth. So, I mean, in order to have a test score, you have to have an assessment that will provide you with to be able to provide you with that score. Right, so whether that would be an assessment that's created by a teacher team, which probably wouldn't be reliable and valid, or or another assessment that does have reliability and validity, right? The selection of intervention is the most difficult part of all of this, and so knowing what assessments cover the standards that you've identified for your success, that's critical because almost the easy part is figuring out what the growth score would be. There's tools for that, right? But what assessments that you're using, that takes a lot of collaborative conversation.
So how would this look any different if I didn't have your SLO? Because I would still put all that same data in whether I had an SLO or not, and I'd still get the same result.
You could. I would be less sure that you had a collaborative process to determine what assessments are going into it. But I would design this tool to make SLOs easier for everybody. Because once you...
It seems like getting the data is easier using this tool.
Yeah. But
I don't see
determining...
how it's going with the SLO. Like, to me, it's just, you can take any data and put it in there and give me the information.
You could.
How is this specific
Yeah.
I think we're looking at SLO on a micro classroom level versus SLO maybe on grade level or school level. And so you select the assessments that contain the measures that you're trying to get at. So whatever, something to do with fractions maybe in grade 3. So you would pick that unit assessment around fractions, which relates back to that SLO, and dump that data in.
Yeah.
Understanding how this is any different than just taking your regular testing.
What test data? Let's have an offline conversation because I think I'm going to have to have a tier 2 level discussion with you because first, what assessments are going in here, right? Do you have a collaborative conversation or process to be able to determine what assessments are going in here? That's not a yes or no question. That's a collaborative process that you need to have an established process for, and SLOs get you to that point. The way that this tool is designed too is designed to be consistent with student learning objective methodology. In SLO methodology, you meet objectives or don't meet objectives. You set student growth targets, right? You set targets that you either meet or don't meet based on criteria that you set forth within the student learning objective. So it meets the SLO methodology in that you are setting growth targets. It just does so in a way that takes some of the labor out of it for determining what those growth targets are going to be. It is very hard to set growth targets that are both ambitious yet reasonable, right? And using a tool that sets what the growth targets should be based on how your students have done in the past is a good best practice method for doing it. It's a way to kind of introduce kind of NWA-ish like methodology in a way that is that can be applied to many, many differing types of summative assessment. So, and the best way to probably investigate this is plug your own students' scores into it and see how it works. Because this is all hypothetical unless you actually put your Jane Smith's, your John Doe's scores into the tool and see what type of scores they come out. Now, I've had some districts that put their NWA scores in here and they got the same results. They're very, very similar results and they were pretty happy with that. But this wasn't designed for NWA. This was designed for use within a student learning objective. This was designed for districts that are implementing student learning objective to make it easier for districts to set good growth goals that will facilitate continuous improvement. So it's not for everybody. You don't have to use it. It's just a way to try to help make life easier to set good goals for your students based on how students have done in the past, okay? So you can use other methodology too, and that's totally acceptable. Okay, so now we have, what are examples of student learning objectives? What are student learning objectives? So now we're going to spend some time. Oh, we're getting close to time already.
Yeah, we were just going to tell them about these where we're going to dig into.
Okay. So we're going to dig into these a lot more tomorrow. But tomorrow we're going to go through what are SLOs and example SLOs, both SLOs that have been written by teachers in other states and teachers that have gone through our workshops and have uploaded their own SLOs after the course, after going through the trainings. So, and there's Michigan example SLOs. They're available at this website and this website. And we'll go through, and you can, if you want homework, you can. But we'll go through this tomorrow, so don't worry. There's also other districts that have been engaged in both student learning objective and student growth work in general, right? Wayne Reese has developed some excellent professional development around measurement of student growth. SI Timeline, which is a school improvement website, has provided some good guidance for measurement of student growth. MESA, their School Advanced Growth Plus network is very good. Michigan's Model Arts Education Instruction and Assessment Project provides good assessment for the performance arts. And if you notice within the assessment inventory, I provided an example of that, of those assessments within that assessment inventory. Somebody up in the UP's developed a good SLO web face, that Public School of Calumet, Larium, and Quinoa. And data warehouses are doing some good work in measurement of student growth to make things easier for educators across the state.
Okay, so one of our regular tools and protocols we use is the communications plan. We aren't going to spend time working on that today, as much as just pointing out to you that it's a resource that's available. And some of the questions, sorry, one more slide back. Some of the things that the communication plan helps to accomplish, helping to communicate where teachers and educators can go to help, how we're going to monitor this to make sure our process has fidelity, as well as who to, again, kind of a help desk of who to go through to get some answers. So our communication plan helps you to identify and communicate those resources that are available. That's at the end of day 3, we're going to give you a work time at the end, and this is one of the options you'll have to work on at that time. But we just want to let you know that it's there for right now. Again, here's how you get to it. So you have that in your PowerPoint as a resource, and also, of course, the document is in the day 1 folder. But that's really all the content that we have for today. This is our contact information. Brian and I are on here. Rebecca and Michelle are our other 2 office colleagues that work around educator evaluation. So really, these are the 4 people at MDE that know and work with educator evaluation the most. Rebecca is a former district superintendent, so she's really good with the district implementation ideas around EdEval. And Michelle is also a former district superintendent. She's really good around the frameworks, especially the administrator frameworks. So we all have different specialty areas, so just know that these are some people that you can contact if you need support with educator evaluation. Okay? We have come to the end of day 1. Thank you for all your attention. You made it all the way to the end. We hope all of you are back for tomorrow. We know this is heavy stuff, so thanks for sticking with us. Even more team time tomorrow. Thank you for a great day.